Chapter 2740. Jianchun and the others shook their heads instinctively, and their gazes towards Su Zimo changed gradually. This man was fine after drinking a bowl of sword chi pool water? Jianchun had a stomach full of accusations and questions. However, he could not say a single word at that moment, and lost his temper instantly. Right then, in the sword cleansing pool, Kitsune seemed to be unable to take it, and let out a grunt. Her face was pale, and she looked like she was in pain. Her aura was extremely weak, and she looked pitiful. When Jianchun and the others saw that, they felt their hearts ache. Instinctively, Kitsune looked towards Su Zimo and panted slightly with a questioning look in her eyes. Indeed, she could not take it anymore. Su Zimo shook his head gently, and still did not allow her to come out. In reality, Su Zimo's spirit consciousness and attention had been focused on Kitsune the entire time, as he paid attention to her physical condition. Kitsune had not reached the limits of what she could endure. In the sword cleansing pool, Kitsune grit her teeth, and her bloodied body trembled slightly. Even her life force was draining continuously. However, the sharpness in her eyes did not diminish, and her gaze was resolute without any wavering. That was Kitsune's will. Back in Baiming Town, her dantian was shattered, but that 15-year-old girl did not submit. The sword cultivators frowned when they saw that. Even Chu Xian could not bear to watch. Jianchun could no longer hold it in and said in a deep voice, "Fellow Taoist Su, even if you can withstand the sword chi of the sword cleansing pool, it doesn't mean that junior sister Baiming can do the same. Her cultivation realm is only equivalent to a rank 9 heavenly immortal. However, you're already a perfected immortal. That's right. If anything happens to senior sister Baiming, can you bear the responsibility?" Many sword cultivators stepped forward and berated him. Su Zimo's expression was calm and unmoved. Right then, Kitsune seemed to be unable to hold on, and her body went limp. Her eyes were tightly shut as she fainted on the spot, and gradually sank to the bottom of the sword cleansing pool. Ah! Many sword cultivators cried out in alarm, and moved one after another, wanting to rescue Kitsune. Right at this moment, a figure flashed past the sword purification pool, and then he swung his wide sleeve to sweep up the heavily injured Kitsune, before dashing towards the distance. The speed of this figure was too fast. When everyone arrived above the sword cleansing pool, the figure had already left with Kitsune and vanished. Only Jianchun and the others vaguely saw that the person who attacked just now was Kitsune's master, the cultivator surnamed Su. Junior sister Baiming is so heavily injured. Will she be alright? I don't think so, Jianchun said in a low voice. Junior sister Baiming's physical body and bloodline are extremely strong. She should be able to recover in a year or so. That's good. Chu Xian was a little annoyed and said, "That fellow Taoist Su is really something. How can he cultivate like that? No matter how strong the body is, it can't withstand such torture." Jianchun said, "It's not necessarily a bad thing that junior sister Baiming is injured this time. Let's discuss how to deal with this matter after she recovers for a while." 3 days later, Jianchun and the others were still in seclusion in their cave abodes when they heard a commotion outside. "What's going on?" Jianchun hurried out to ask. "Senior brother Jianchun, bad news," a sword cultivator said while panting. "Senior sister Baiming went to the sword cleansing pool to cultivate again." "What?" Jianchun was shocked and said hurriedly. "Junior sister Baiming was severely injured 3 days ago, and she went to the sword cleansing pool again? Does she want to die?" At the mention of this, a strange expression appeared on the sword cultivator's face as he stammered and stopped talking. Jianchun sped in the direction of the sword cleansing pool and scolded, "If you have something to say, just say it. Why are you stammering?" The sword cultivator coughed gently and said, "Senior sister Baiming's injuries from 3 days ago have completely healed." "What?" Jianchun staggered and widened his eyes in disbelief. "She recovered from such severe injuries in 3 days? How is that possible?" The sword cultivator smiled bitterly. "I'm not sure either." The other perfected immortal senior brothers also found it unbelievable. Jianchun was confused. With such severe injuries, even if all the elixirs in the sword realm were used on Kitsune, they would not be able to heal Kitsune in 3 days, right? Kitsun's body and bloodline were indeed powerful, but not to this extent. What the hell? A figure in green suddenly flashed across Jianchen's mind. Could it be related to him? Jianchen shook his head and thought to himself, he's a perfected immortal. Even if he's good at medicine, it's impossible for him to heal junior sister Baiming in 3 days. In fact, Kitsun's injuries were indeed healed by Su Zimo. After his creation, Qinglian true body entered the 12th grade. A large amount of vitality was nurtured in her bloodline. In the Yin-Yang talisman scripture, Su Zimo had comprehended a secret healing technique, the lotus finger, which could be used with his Qinglian bloodline. In the Tao of Yin and Yang, Yin was in charge of killing and Yang was in charge of life. This lotus finger could use a secret technique to seal the massive vitality nurtured in Qinglian's bloodline into Kitsun's body. To a certain extent, Kitsun was nourished by the 12th grade creation Qinglian bloodline, and her injuries healed extremely quickly. In 3 days, she was completely healed. Su Zimo naturally had a backup plan for letting Kitsun cultivate in such a way. This time, Su Zimo did not follow Kitsun to the sword cleansing pool. Instead, he stayed in Kitsun's cave abode to purge the remaining power of the 2 curses in his body. Beside the sword cleansing pool, Jianchen and the others finally arrived and tried to persuade Kitsun, but the latter turned a deaf ear. It was only when she was covered in injuries and barely breathing that Kitsun staggered out of the sword cleansing pool and forced herself to return to her cave abode before fainting. Su Zimo helped her up and used the lotus finger to heal her injuries and cleanse her bloodline once more. Her body would be destroyed, repaired, destroyed again, and repaired again. This repeated cycle, together with the secret technique of the martial scripture, would allow Baiming Xue's body and bloodline to grow and transform at the fastest speed. 3 days later, Kitsun recovered and entered the sword cleansing pool to cultivate once more. The cycle repeated. Every 3 days, Kitsun would cultivate in the sword cleansing pool for a longer period of time. In just a month, the berserk sword chi in the sword cleansing pool could no longer harm Kitsun's body. She cultivated in the sword cleansing pool for an entire day and was completely unharmed. Kitsun's cultivation realm did not improve at all, and there was no change in her appearance either. However, in reality, her body and bloodline were undergoing a massive transformation. Even if others knew about this cultivation method, they would not be able to imitate it. Firstly, it had an extremely high requirement on the cultivator's willpower. Secondly, it required a cultivator with the grade 12 creation Qinglian bloodline to help the other party, without hesitation, at the cost of expending a large amount of their own essence blood. Of course, the sword cultivators did not think much of it. Junior sister Baiming was pure and beautiful like a fairy. She was a peerless beauty. Why did she have to suffer such cruel torture? That Wu Dao had cultivated for so long, and yet, he had not made any progress in his cultivation realm at all. As time passed by, not only did this cause a stir in Sword Culling Peak, it even alarmed the sword cultivators of the other 7 sword peaks. Chapter 2741. The water of the sword cleansing pool at the foot of Sword Crafting Peak was no longer harmful to Kitsun. This day, Kitsun changed her method and headed straight to the Sword Chi waterfall of Sword Crafting Peak to cultivate. This was much more dangerous than cultivating in the sword cleansing pool. Sword Crafting Peak soared into the clouds, and the Sword Chi waterfall that fell from the peak was extremely lethal. On the first day Kitsun headed to the Sword Chi waterfall, she was severely injured by the Sword Chi waterfall and fainted in the sword cleansing pool once more. Su Zimo appeared in time again and brought Kitsun back to the cave abode. Sai, junior sister Baiming must have been possessed. The path of cultivation is not to rush for results. Who would torture themselves like junior sister Baiming? Junior sister Baiming couldn't have thought of such an inhumane cultivation method. She must have been forced by that Su guy. The sword cultivators of Sword Crafting Peak were indignant and were increasingly disgusted and conflicted with Su Zimo's existence. Conference Hall of Sword Crafting Peak. This is ridiculous. A true self-realm sword cultivator stood out and complained. Junior sister Baiming has been tortured by that Su guy ever since he came to Sword World. That Su guy said that he was here to visit Sword World. However, He has been hiding in junior sister Baiming's cave abode for the past month, and rarely shows himself. I think he's afraid of us from Sword World. The Peak Master thinks highly of junior sister Baiming. What did he say? Many sword cultivators gathered in the conference hall and discussed fervently. Many of them looked at Wang Dong, who was seated in the middle, and was also the number one of sword crafting peak. Wang Dong said, Master must be concerned about this as well. However, he's not only the peak master of sword crafting peak, he's also a Grotto Heaven Realm expert. Given his status, it's not appropriate for him to interfere in this matter. We'll have to think of a way to resolve this matter. Wang Tong had always liked Baiming Shui, but he had never shown it publicly. His heart ached when he saw Kitsune suffering these past few days. However, he was, after all, the number one cultivator of the sword-slaying peak. He had already reached the Dongshu stage of the true first realm, and could be considered a peak true immortal. If he went to find Su Zimo, it would be like bullying the weak. In the sword world, the most important thing was fairness. Unless there were extremely special circumstances, in the sword world, it was tacitly agreed that only cultivators of the same level could spar with each other. If someone relied on the fact that their cultivation level was higher than their opponents, even if they won, they wouldn't win the respect of the sword cultivators. Instead, they would attract criticism and ridicule. For example, Su Zimo was now a true immortal in the consolidation stage. In the sword realm, he could only find true immortals in the consolidation stage to spar with. Even if it was only one stage higher, reaching the celestial being stage, in the eyes of many sword cultivators, it was an unfair victory. Senior brother Wang, think of something, a sword cultivator said. If she continues to cultivate like this, junior sister Baiming will probably be crippled by that Su guy. Yes, junior sister Baiming's talent in swordsmanship is praised by even the peak master. How can she be destroyed by that guy? Wang Tong pondered for a long time. A sword light flashed in his eyes, as if he had made a decision. He said, It seems that this is the only way. Let's choose the strongest true immortal in the consolidation stage, from the sword slaughtering peak, to spar with fellow cultivator Su. If I can defeat him, I'll take the opportunity to persuade him so that he'll back off. If fellow cultivator Su loses in front of so many people, he will probably be too embarrassed to be junior sister Baiming's master. Chu Xian nodded and said, That's right. If he can't even defeat us, he doesn't deserve to be junior sister Baiming's master. I'll go. Chu Xian was the first to stand out and said, No matter what, we brought fellow cultivator Su back. I am responsible for this. You. Wang Tong was silent and hesitant. Chu Xian was a true immortal in the consolidation stage, but her combat strength was only at the upper level. She wasn't the strongest. Wang Tong said slowly, This battle is very important. We can't afford to lose. On the one hand, we have to save junior sister Baiming. On the other hand, we can't tarnish the reputation of the sword realm. Let me do it. At this moment, a sword cultivator stood out and said indifferently, Niechen. He was one of the most famous geniuses in the sword slaughtering peak. Among the ordinary disciples, he was only defeated by Kitsune. When he transcended the tribulation and ascended, he attracted the 79 heavenly tribulations. Wang Tong was relieved when he saw Niechen stand out. He nodded and said, With junior brother Nye, there is no doubt about the outcome of this battle. However, I have a few words of advice. Wang Tong thought for a while and said, I have a feeling that this person might have some powerful trump cards. Junior brother Nye, don't be careless when you fight with him. Senior brother, don't worry. Niechen said, If I fight, no matter who my opponent is, I will go all out. To me, there is no such thing as underestimating the enemy. Wang Tong smiled again and said, But junior brother Nye, you have to know your limits. After all, the other party is a guest from afar, and was once junior sister Baiming's master. If you can easily win, you can stop at the right moment and don't be rude. Niechen pursed his lips and said, I won't kill him. At that time, I'll teach him an unforgettable lesson. Yes, that's good. Wang Tong was relieved and said with a smile, I won't go over lest fellow Taoist Su is too pressured. I'll go prepare some good wine. and wait for junior brother Nie's triumphant return. Niechen raised his head slightly and said proudly, "Senior brother, you have to prepare quickly. I'll be right back." When the other sword cultivators heard that, they cheered and followed Niechen towards Kitsun's cave abode. Before long, Niechen and the rest had already arrived in front of Kitsun's cave abode. Along the way, it naturally attracted many sword cultivators to watch the battle. When they arrived in front of the cave abode, more than half of the sword cultivators on the sword slaughtering peak were attracted. Apart from some ranking battles arranged by the sword world, the sword slaughtering peak had not been so lively for a long time. Before Niechen could shout, a sword cultivator could not hold back and went up to knock on the door. Su Zimo was in the cave abode and was healing Kitsune. When he noticed the clamor outside, he could not help but frown. What's going on outside? Kitsune had just started healing, and her essence spirit was weak. She could not detect the situation outside and asked in a low voice, "Wait a moment, I'll go out and take a look." Su Zimo moved and came to the door of the cave abode. He pushed the door open and walked out. When they saw Su Zimo walk out, the clamor outside the door immediately quieted down. In more than a month, Su Zimo had used the Hell Water Spring to remove the 2 curses in his body and recovered to his original state. "Why are you all here?" Su Zimo asked. Niechen held a long sword in his arms and walked slowly towards Su Zimo. He said, "I heard that you came from the heaven realm. I'm Niechen, a genuine immortal at the consolidation stage. I'd like to exchange pointers with you." Chapter 2742. You want to spar with me? Su Zimo looked at the naive sword cultivator called Niechen and wondered if he had chosen the wrong person. But on second thought, the distance between the heaven realm and the sword realm was too far. The people in the sword realm did not know who he was, let alone what skills he had. It was understandable that this person came to spar with him. However, for the current Su Zimo, after stepping into the true first stage, the 12th stage Qinglian's real body had grown to the peak state. Even if he did not use his bloodline or any magic, he could crush all the true immortals in the true first stage with just Qinglian's real body. Kitsune was still in the cave abode, waiting for him to go back and heal her injuries. Moreover, a large amount of energy from the Emperor's tomb had accumulated in his body. After removing the 2 curses, he was ready to refine and absorb the energy to break through to the heaven realm. He did not expect Niechen to come at this time. Seeing that Su Zimo was silent, Jianchen thought that he had some concerns, so he stepped forward and said, "Fellow Taoist Su, you have been in the sword realm for a while. My junior brothers heard that you came from the heaven realm, so they all want to see your skills. Don't worry, fellow Taoist Su. Junior brother Niechen will know what to do." "Okay." Su Zimo nodded. He just wanted to end it quickly and return to the cave abode to help Kitsune heal her injuries while he continued to cultivate. As for this Niechen, to him, it was not a challenge at all. Moreover, he had a good impression of the sword realm, so he could not refuse the other party's visit. Moreover, the sword realm had always treated him with respect. Even if they came to challenge him, they only found a sword cultivator in the true first stage. Seeing that Su Zimo agreed, Jianchen was stunned for a moment and felt a little surprised. The commotion here attracted more than half of the sword cultivators in the sword-slaying peak. They gathered in a circle, 3 inside and 3 outside. More and more people gathered, and all of them looked excited. Play a perfect copy of the old version of the divine artifact that could change the source of the old version. Changing source artifact. Niechen stepped forward and said calmly, "Fellow Taoist Su, after all, you are a guest from afar. You can make the first move. I will give you 3 moves." Hearing this, there was a burst of applause from the crowd. In the eyes of many sword cultivators, Niechen had given up the initiative and allowed Su Zimo to make the first move. He had already given Su Zimo enough respect. "You want me to go first?" Su Zimo had a strange look on his face. Niechen nodded lightly and said, "Feel free to make your move. I absolutely won't retaliate within 3 moves. But after 3 moves, you have to be careful." Su Zimo smiled and nodded. Jianchen took a deep breath and said loudly, "Get ready. Begin." As soon as he finished speaking, Su Zimo's figure flashed, and he instantly arrived before Nie Chun at a shocking speed. Nie Chun was shocked. So fast. As Nie Chun had just said that he would give the other party 3 moves out of courtesy, it was not appropriate for him to retaliate. He could only subconsciously withdraw. Su Zimo stretched out his hand and grabbed the sword in his arms. Before Nie Chun could react, Su Zimo's hand had already grabbed the sword hilt. Wang! A dazzling sword light flashed, accompanied by a clear and melodious sword cry. The onlooking sword cultivators only felt a flash of light before their eyes, and then it disappeared in an instant. The next moment, Su Zimo had already returned to his original position, as though he had never moved. The two of them had just clashed. The exchange was too fast, and not many sword cultivators saw clearly what happened in the middle. Su Zimo had a calm expression. On the other hand, Nie Chun's expression was terrible, and he did not say anything. What happened earlier on? I'm not sure. I don't think it's 3 moves. Why did he stop fighting? Could it be that senior brother Nie Chun failed to control his sword and attacked in advance? As the sword cultivators discussed, a trace of blood seeped out from Nie Chun's glabella. A drop of dazzling scarlet blood flowed down slowly and hovered at the tip of the brush. The surrounding discussions gradually died down. However, Nie Chun was injured in the blink of an eye. Apart from Nie Chun and Su Zimo, not many people could see clearly what happened earlier on. Su Zimo closed in and pulled out the sword in front of Nie Chun. He pierced Nie Chun's glabella and returned Nie Chun's sword to its scabbard. Nie Chun knew very well that Su Zimo had 100 ways to kill him given that series of actions. As for him, he could not dodge at all. The difference was too great. If the other party attacked, he would not even have the chance to attack. Nie Chun took a deep breath of air and said with a grim expression, "Fellow Taoist Su, I have to admit that I wouldn't have been your match if you had attacked first." Su Zimo smiled gently. The sword cultivator was rather magnanimous and did not fly into a rage out of humiliation. Instead, he admitted that he had lost. Nie Chun said, "However, all of my techniques are based on this sword. I would like to challenge you again, and will no longer be polite. Please grant me my wish, fellow Taoist." This time round, Nie Chun retracted the arrogance in his heart and did not dare to be careless. "Sure." Su Zimo nodded casually. "Buzz." This time round, Nie Chun pulled out his sword immediately and held it horizontally in front of his chest. Killing intent surged from his body, and he emitted the killing intent of Sword Dao. Nie Chun had already regarded Su Zimo as the strongest opponent in his life, and did not dare to hold back at all. Su Zimo still did not make any unnecessary movements. He took a step forward as though he was taking a stroll, and arrived in front of Nie Chun instantly. The footwork seemed casual, but in fact, it was a combination of the profundities of the 9 palaces' subtle steps and plow heaven stride. Not only did it cross the void instantly, it also emitted a soul-stirring invincible aura. Even a heavenly being perfected immortal might not be able to gain the upper hand, let alone a true immortal at the consolidation stage. Su Zimo reached out and grabbed the sword in Nie Chun's hand. Nie Chun channeled his Dao fruit frantically and Dao halos bloomed behind his head. The sword in his hand spun, and an extremely sharp sword aura burst forth. However, Su Zimo was a step faster. Before Nie Chun could release his sword aura, his wrist was grabbed by Su Zimo and squeezed gently. Nie Chun was in pain and his grip loosened. The sword had already landed in Su Zimo's hands. Su Zimo turned his sword, and a sword beam appeared before disappearing instantly. He had already retreated to his original position. The two of them were still 100 feet apart. Nie Chun hugged the sword in his arms as though nothing had happened. However, there was another wound in his glabella. If that sword had penetrated any deeper, he would have died on the spot. "I've lost." After a long silence, Nie Chun said slowly. Thereafter, he cupped his fists towards Su Zimo and turned to leave silently. A series of sighs came from the surrounding crowd. A look of pity flashed through Jian Chen's eyes. To think that even Nie Chun of Sword Slaughter Peak, who was at the consolidation stage, could not defeat this person. Furthermore, the methods that this person displayed earlier were indeed terrifying. Not only was his movement technique extremely fast, his body was also strong. He could defeat Nie Chun, who was wielding a sword with his bare hands. Jianchen knew that even if he were to go against Su Zimo, he might not be able to win for sure. Chapter 2743. In the conference hall, Wang Dong had prepared fine wine and was waiting for Nie Chen's triumphant return. In his opinion, there shouldn't be any accidents in this battle. When Nie Chen condensed his Dao fruit and stepped into the true self realm, he had attracted 79 heavenly tribulations, which was rare in the sword world. Furthermore, Nie Chen's combat strength was ranked in the top 5 among the consolidation stage sword cultivators of Sword Slayer Peak. As expected, not long after, Nie Chen's figure appeared at the entrance of the conference hall. Wang Dong smiled and went up to him praising, "It hasn't even been half an hour. Junior brother Nie, you're indeed fast." When Nie Chen heard that, the corners of his mouth twitched uncontrollably. Wang Dong could not help but frown when he saw that Nie Chen's expression was not right, and he was a little depressed. He took a closer look and realized that there were 2 fine sword wounds between Nie Chen's brows. Although the wounds had already healed, there were still traces of them. "Junior brother Nie, you've lost?" Wang Dong probed. Nie Chen sighed. "This cultivator from the heaven realm is indeed skilled. I can't defeat him." Wang Dong consoled. "It's fine. Junior brother Nie, don't be discouraged. Who hasn't been defeated since we started cultivating?" Nie Chen laughed bitterly. Actually, a loss was a loss. However, he was truly defeated too thoroughly. The other party did not even use a weapon, and he could not even last a single round. This was a huge blow to him. Seeing that Nie Chen was depressed, Wang Dong encouraged him. "Junior brother Nie, don't be discouraged. The sword Dao of the sword cultivators of Sword Slayer Peak is meant to kill. He's a guest from afar. You restrained yourself and couldn't unleash the true power of the sword Dao of massacre. It's reasonable for you to lose. If it was a life and death battle, it's still unknown who would win." Nie Chen opened his mouth slightly and hesitated. It was not that he did not unleash his full potential, but that Su Zimo did not give him the chance at all. If it was a life and death battle earlier, he would have died countless times. The 2 of them had not chatted for long when a sword cultivator suddenly rushed over from outside and said while panting, "Senior brother Wang." After senior brother Nie was defeated, Chu Xian and the other senior brothers and sisters couldn't stand it and stood out to challenge that person. "Nonsense," Wang Tong scolded. "Since you want to spar with him, of course it should be under a fair environment. Junior brother Nie has already sparred with him today. If you want to spar again, you have to wait for a day and give him some time to rest. If we were to defeat him in a battle of attrition, it would be an unfair victory. Wouldn't it be a laughingstock? If this were to spread, people would say that our sword world is bullying outsiders." That sword cultivator looked embarrassed and muttered softly, "It's not certain who's bullying who. What are you mumbling about?" Wang Dong frowned and said, "Go back quickly and stop junior sister Chu Xian and the others. The other party is junior sister Baiming's master in name. We can't do things like taking turns to fight them." The sword cultivator looked embarrassed. "Senior brother Wang, you're too late. By the time I rushed over, it was already over." "Is it over?" Wang Dong asked helplessly. "You didn't hurt fellow Taoist Su, did you?" The corner of Nie Chen's mouth twitched again. "Ugh." The sword cultivator could not help but roll his eyes. "Senior brother Wang, you might not know the capabilities of this Su fella. Senior sister Chu Xian and more than 10 other sword cultivators went up against him, but they were all defeated without even lasting a single round." Wang Dong raised his brows. Junior sister Chu Xian and more than 10 other sword cultivators challenged this person one after another, and all of them were defeated? Wang Dong looked at Nie Chen instinctively. Nie Chen coughed softly and said, "I forgot to mention earlier. I couldn't even last a single round against him. He's that strong?" The scene of him meeting Su Zimo for the first time surfaced in Wang Dong's mind. He did not seem to sense any threat from the other party. Wang Dong pondered for a moment and asked, "Did he make use of some powerful numinous treasure?" Nie Chen said, "When we fought he was bare-handed. He snatched my sword away from me twice and injured me." He was able to snatch the sword of a sword cultivator bare-handed. Wang Dong nodded secretly. Seemed like this person was indeed capable. Wang Dong asked again. What mystic skills did he use? No. The sword cultivator shook his head. What do you mean? Wang Dong did not understand and asked subconsciously. Can't you tell the origin of the mystic skills he used? The sword cultivator answered honestly. He didn't use any mystic skills. Wang Dong was stunned and could not react for a moment. No mystic skills were used in a battle between perfected immortals? That sword cultivator said. That person used a set of straightforward fist and leg techniques to beat senior sister Chu Xian and the others into a sorry state. At this moment, another sword cultivator sped over from outside. As soon as he stepped into the hall, the sword cultivator shouted loudly, Senior Brother Wang. That person has already defeated more than 40 sword cultivators in front of junior sister Baiming's cave abode. Wang Dong's heart pounded when he heard that, and his blood became a little unstable. He had just defeated Chu Xian and more than 10 other sword cultivators. How long had it been? And now he had defeated more than 20 sword cultivators. It was embarrassing enough to take turns to fight. If they were defeated so thoroughly after taking turns to fight, then the reputation of the sword slaughtering peak would be completely lost in the sword world. Wang Dong could not care less at this moment. No matter what, Su Zimo came from the heaven realm. As sword cultivators of the sword world, they naturally could not be weak. Wang Dong said in a deep voice, Ask junior brothers Bu Yao and Wen Zheng to come see me. Senior brother Bu Yao and senior brother Wen Zheng have already rushed over when they heard about this. The sword cultivator quickly said. Wang Dong heaved a sigh of relief and nodded slightly, saying, That's good. Nie Chen and the other sword cultivators looked at each other, feeling a little uneasy. They had seen Su Zimo's methods and truly felt the invincible power. Although Bu Yao and Wen Zheng were among the top perfected immortals of the consolidation stage in the sword slaughtering peak, it was hard to say who would win against this person. Wang Dong seemed to be a little restless. He took a deep breath and said, Let's go. I'll go and take a look and see what this person is capable of. I'll hold the line for junior brothers Bu Yao and Wen Zheng. Yes. Before Wang Dong and the others walked out of the meeting hall, another sword cultivator rushed over from afar. Wang Dong's heart sank when he saw the flustered look on this person's face. Senior brother Wang, bad news. The sword cultivator saw Wang Dong and said loudly, Senior brothers Bu Yao and Wen Zheng were knocked unconscious by that person's two palms. They couldn't even pull out their swords. This news was like a shocking thunder that struck Wang Dong and made him a little dizzy. Bu Yao and Wen Zheng were defeated too quickly, weren't they? As sword cultivators, they could not even pull out their swords. If this news spread, they would probably become the biggest joke of the 8 great sword peaks. Chapter 2744. Sword Culling Peaks Challenge to Su Zimo did not last long. In less than 2 hours it was over. After the 2 true immortals, Bu Yao and Wen Zheng, were defeated one after another, no one else from the Sword Killer Peak stood up. There were more than 1,000 true immortals in the Sword Killer Peak. There were more than 500 true immortals in the True Immortal stage. However, even Bu Yao and Wen Zheng were defeated by Su Zimo. They did not even manage to draw their swords. The other sword cultivators would only be humiliating themselves if they challenged him. Su Zimo wanted to end the battle as soon as possible, so that he could return to his cave abode to be treated by Kitsune. Hence, he did not continue the fight. However, this incident caused a huge uproar among the 8 major sword peaks. Have you heard? Baiming Shui's master went to the sword-slaying peak and defeated 49 sword cultivators from the sword-slaying peak within 2 hours. So strong? What's his cultivation level? I heard that he's a true immortal in the True Immortal stage. His cultivation level is not high. How can he be junior sister Baiming's master? That's the problem. I heard that the way he trained junior sister Baiming was too cruel. The other disciples of the Sword Killer Peak could not stand it and wanted to teach him a lesson. They did not expect him to teach them a lesson. The 5 Elements Sword Peak was one of the 8 major sword peaks. On this day, a few true immortals sat together in the main hall of the 5 Elements Sword Peak and chatted casually as they sipped tea. The Sword Killer Peak has lost face this time. The sword cultivator in the middle shook his head and sighed. His name was Gong Sunyu, and he was the number one true disciple of the Five Elements Sword Peak. The person on the left said with a sharp gaze, "The Sword Killer Peak used to be the strongest of the 8 major sword peaks. I did not expect it to be reduced to such a state. You can't even defeat one of them." His Taoist name was Tai Lai, and he was from the Supreme Sword Peak. He was also the number one true disciple of the Supreme Sword Peak. The sword cultivator on the right continued. The reason why the sword-slaying peak could become the leader of the 8 great sword peaks was also because of the existence of the immortal slaying emperor. Back then, he created the 3 great sword techniques and the slaughter sword Tao. He established the 8th peak in the sword world, which is the current sword slaughtering peak. It is famous throughout the heaven realm. His name was Xinyu, and he was from the illusory sword peak. It's a pity that the immortal slayer emperor died. Although the 3 great sword arts have been passed down, they have lost some of their charm. Another sword cultivator sighed. This sword cultivator was a monk, holding a string of prayer beads in his hand. His name was Monk Zhu Jian, and he came from Zen Sword Peak. A tall and burly man with an overbearing aura said in a booming voice, "That's right. After so many years, no one has been able to successfully cultivate that supreme divine ability, the immortal slaying sword." Because of junior sister Baiming's appearance, many seniors of the sword-slaying peak placed their hopes on her. Unfortunately, her cultivation went astray, and she couldn't condense the fruit of Tao to step into the true self realm. She has even less hope of cultivating the immortal slaying sword. This burly man was called Qin Zhong. He wore bronze armor and carried a thick and heavy giant sword on his back. He came from the Overlord Sword Peak. The 5 of them were all among the best peak true immortals in their respective sword peaks. Now that they were gathered together, they naturally heard the news from the sword-slaying peak. Gong Sunyu of the 5 Elements Sword Peak looked at the Tai Lai Sword Immortal and said with a smile, "Now it seems that the one most likely to cultivate the supreme divine ability, the immortal slaying sword, is a junior brother from the Supreme Sword Peak." The Tai Lai Sword Immortal nodded and said, "Although this person comes from the heaven realm, he is indeed very talented in the sword Tao, which is rare in both ancient and modern times. He also received many sword Tao inheritances. When he stepped into the true self realm, he attracted the 89 heavenly tribulation. Even Master praised him. He even said that he is the one most likely to comprehend the immortal slaying sword." Qin Zhong said loudly, "No matter what, the sword-slaying peak is still one of the 8 peaks. If they lose face, it will not look good for us. Moreover, junior sister Baiming is so talented in the sword Tao. Don't let that person destroy her." Monk Zhu Jian nodded and said, "Master mentioned this to me. He is more worried about junior sister Baiming and can't do it himself. He asked me to think of a way." Monk Zhu Jian's master was the peak lord of the Zen Sword Peak. The others looked at each other, knowing what to say. In fact, Kitsun's situation had not only attracted their attention, but also the peak lords of the 8 peaks. However, the peak lords were all sword immortals at the peak of the Grotto Heaven realm. They naturally couldn't do anything to a mere true immortal from the heaven realm. "Everyone, what do you think we should do?" Gong Sunyu asked. Xin Yu of the illusory sword peak said, "It's simple. We will each pick a strongest sword immortal at the consolidation stage and challenge him. No matter how strong this person is, can he defeat all the geniuses of the 8 peaks? All right." Gong Sunyu nodded slightly and said, "In the 5 Elements Sword Peak, there is indeed a true immortal at the consolidation stage who is stronger than Bu Yao and Wen Zheng." Qin Zhong looked at sword immortal Tai Lai and asked, "Is that person from the extreme sword peak free? If he fights, that person will definitely lose." Sword immortal Tai Lai smiled and said, "Junior brother Yin is still in seclusion. There is no need for him to do such a small thing." The sword immortals chatted for a while more before returning. The next day, in the conference hall of the sword-slaying peak, Gong Sunyu of the 5 Elements Sword Peak, sword immortal Tai Lai of the extreme sword peak, Xin Yu of the illusory sword peak, Monk Zhu Jian of the Zen Sword Peak, and Qin Zhong of the Overlord Sword Peak arrived at the same time. Wang Dong knew what they were here for when he saw them appear. I didn't expect that the matter at the sword slaughtering peak would alarm all of you. Wang Dong went up to them and invited them into the main hall. He smiled bitterly and said, I'm sorry. Gong Sun Yu smiled and said, Brother Wang, you don't have to be like this. The sword cultivators of the 8 peaks are all disciples of the same sect. When the sword slaughtering peak is in trouble, we naturally can't stand by and do nothing. Qin Zhong laughed and said, Mainly, we can't bear to see Sister Baiming's talent in the sword Dao being destroyed by that person. He's just a true immortal at the consolidation stage. How high can his standards be? It's a good opportunity to teach him a lesson and let him know that there is always someone better than him. Wang Dong hesitated and said, My fellow disciples, you may not know, but this person does have some tricks up his sleeve. Brother Wang, you don't have to worry. Shen Yu smiled and said, The true immortals at the consolidation stage selected by the 5 peaks have never been defeated by anyone of the same level. Their combat strength is top-notch. There can't be any mistakes. Monk Zhu Jian nodded slightly and said, 5 sword cultivators are here. No matter how strong that person is, there's no way he can pass all 5 of them. Wang Dong looked at the confidence of the 5 and couldn't help but worry. He muttered to himself, Back then, I was just as confident as you guys. Gong Sun Yu said, Brother Wang, let's take a break here and enjoy some tea while waiting for the good news. As soon as he finished speaking, a figure rushed in from outside. He's here. The sword immortal Tai Lai's eyes lit up, and he said with a smile, I didn't expect him to be faster than we thought. I don't think he can defeat any of the 5 sword cultivators. In the blink of an eye, the sword cultivator rushed into the main hall. The shock on his face had yet to fade as he panted and said, Reporting to Senior Brother Wang, the 5 senior brothers from the major sword peaks were all knocked out by that person. Wang Dong shrugged slightly, not surprised at all. This, Gong Sun Yu, the sword immortal Tai Lai, and the others froze on the spot. Chapter 2745. After Su Zimo dealt with the 5 sword cultivators who had just challenged him, he returned to his cave abode. Kitsune had just woken up from her cultivation. Is there someone outside disturbing Master again? Kitsune frowned slightly. Su Zimo smiled and said, I heard that it's the prodigies of the other sword peaks. I didn't expect that during the period of time when I taught you Wu Dao, it would cause such a big commotion in the sword world. In the past few days, Su Zimo had gradually understood. This group of sword cultivators who came to challenge him simply couldn't stand him teaching Kitsune. They couldn't bear to see Kitsune being cruelly tortured, so they wanted to stand up for her. Master, I'm sorry, Kitsune said. I'll go find the Peak Master now and ask him to restrain some of the true disciples of the sword-slaying peak, so that they won't disturb you. It's okay. Su Zimo waved his hand and said with a smile, These people are quite interesting. They don't affect me much. Interesting. Kitsune blinked and was a little confused. Su Zimo smiled and explained, The cultivation environment and atmosphere in the sword world is very good. After you ascend it, it's your fortune to be able to descend into the sword world. Su Zimo's words were indeed from the bottom of his heart. Although he had been cultivating in the heaven realm before, he had also read some records about the upper realm. The environment in the upper realm was mostly cruel and bloody. The strong were respected, and it was like a dark forest. Even the 9 heavens immortal domain in the heaven realm was the same. However, the sword world was obviously different. There was less deception and intrigue in the sword world, and they wouldn't look down on you just because you came from the lower realm. The sword world valued fairness very much. These sword cultivators couldn't even last a round in his hands. Many of them didn't even have the chance to draw their swords. The difference in combat strength between the 2 sides was so great. But the sword world had never thought of letting perfected immortals of a higher realm come and suppress him. Or 2 or 3 people attacked him at the same time. The people of the sword dimension had to be fair in everything, even when dealing with an outsider like him. As long as there wasn't any deep hatred between them, these sword cultivators wouldn't be willing to bully the weak with their numbers. This was a spirit that the people of Sword World were willing to adhere to and believe in. In the eyes of most people, this spirit might seem a little pedantic and naive, However, in Su Zimo's opinion, this was a civilization that was even more worthy of praise. Thus, even if the people of the sword world had come to challenge him in these 2 days, he had not dealt any heavy blows, and had only subdued them. Right. Su Zimo suddenly thought of something and said, I've observed some of the sword principles of the sword cultivators of the sword-slaying peak. They contain a strong killing intent, which should originate from the 3 major sword skills. Is there any relationship between the sword-slaying peak and the sword practitioner who created the 3 major sword skills? Kitsune nodded and said, he was a senior from the sword world, and his name was the Immortal Slayer Emperor. He was the one who established the sword crafting peak. The size of the sword world as a whole was far inferior to the heaven world. The mainland of the sword-slaying peak was not as vast as the divine firmament immortal domain. However, the strength and foundation of the sword-slaying peak could not be underestimated. The sword-slaying peak was the massacre sword Dao. Su Zimo asked, how's your cultivation of the heavenly slaying and earthly slaying sword skills? Back in Tianhuang mainland, Su Zimo had already imparted the 2 major sword skills to Kitsune. Kitsune displayed the 2 major sword skills in front of Su Zimo. Su Zimo nodded slightly when he sensed the sword intent and killing intent contained within. Kitsune's talent in the sword Dao was indeed shocking. All these years, even without his guidance, she had already cultivated the 2 major sword skills to greater mastery. It was also because Kitsune possessed the 2 major sword skills that she came to the sword-slaying peak after ascending to the sword world. In the sword-slaying peak, she even had the chance to cultivate the human-slaying sword art. However, she was still unable to fuse the 3 major sword skills into one and comprehend the supreme divine power, immortal slaying sword. Due to the death of the immortal slaying Emperor Lord, the ancient scrolls that recorded the 3 major sword skills were lost. Although the 3 major sword skills were passed down, the sword intent of the immortal slaying Emperor Lord could not be passed down. The sword intent was sealed in the 3 ancient scrolls, which were the 3 major sword skills in Su Zimo's hands. Only by witnessing and sensing the sword intent in the ancient scrolls could one fuse the 3 major sword skills. Su Zimo took out the ancient scrolls of the 3 major sword skills and handed them to Kitsune. From today onwards, not only do you have to temper your body and bloodline under the waterfall of the sword cleansing pool, you have to continue cultivating the 3 major sword skills and comprehend the sword intent within. Kitsune's eyes lit up when she saw the 3 ancient scrolls. As a sword cultivator of the sword world, she naturally knew how precious the 3 ancient scrolls were and what they meant to her. Thank you, Master. Kitsune received the 3 major sword skills solemnly and began cultivating in the cave abode. Even though he was the one imparting his Dao to Baiming Shui, in reality, he was also comprehending the 3 great sword arts through Baiming Shui's massacre sword Dao. Right now, he had already fused the 3 major sword skills and could conjure the embryonic form of the immortal slaying sword. However, he had yet to comprehend the supreme divine power. In the past few days at Sword Crafting Peak, Su Zimo had been absorbing the killing intent emitted by Sword Crafting Peak, while comprehending the 3 major sword skills. He had gained quite a lot. There was a high chance that he could fuse the 3 major sword skills completely in Sword Crafting Peak and comprehend the immortal slaying sword. A few days later, in the conference hall of Sword Crafting Peak, apart from Wang Dong, Gong Sunyu, Sword Immortal Tai Lai, Shen Yu, Qin Zhong, and Monk Zhu Jian, there were 2 more Peak Paradise Void Realm perfected immortals. One of them was dressed in black robes and had a cold aura. His cheeks were thin and his eyes were sunken. His name was Li Shui, and he was from Demon Sword Peak. The other one had a cold and expressionless face. His pitch-black eyes seemed to be unable to see anyone except for the sword in his hand. This was Yi Wuchen from Ultimate Sword Peak. He was the number 1 person of Ultimate Sword Peak, and also the number 1 beauty of the sword world, Lin Xuanjin. Yi Wuchen's sword was second only to Lin Xuanjin in Ultimate Sword Peak. Most of the sword cultivators of Ultimate Sword Peak were like this. They had cut off their 7 emotions and 6 desires. They were cold to everyone, as if they didn't recognize anyone. Ultimate Sword Peak and Demon Sword Peak's Sword Dao were unconventional. In terms of killing, they weren't any weaker than the Slaughter Sword Dao. For example, the sword cultivators of Demon Sword Peak would lose their rationality if their Sword Dao fell into the Devil Dao. In addition, their Devil Dao was treacherous and ferocious, making it difficult for them to hold back. The sword cultivators of Ultimate Sword Peak were even more terrifying. They cultivated the Absolute Sword Dao and could enter a special state at any time, cutting off their 7 emotions and 6 desires. Only the sword in their hands and the opponent's blood remained. Once the sword cultivators of these 2 sword peaks attacked, it would be difficult for them to control their strength. Wang Dong said helplessly. I didn't expect that this matter would alarm the 2 sword peaks. Li Shui said indifferently. If it wasn't for the fact that the sword cultivators of your sword peaks were incompetent, we wouldn't have stepped in. The reputation of the sword world can't be trampled by an outsider. Wang Dong wanted to say something but stopped. He sighed and stood up worriedly, pacing back and forth in the hall. After pacing a few rounds, Yi Wuchen seemed to be annoyed. He suddenly opened his mouth and said coldly, Can you stop? It's just an outsider. Is there a need for you to be so worried? Wang Dong turned to look at Yi Wuchen and asked, Do you think I'm worried about that Taoist Su? Then what are you worried about? Wang Dong nodded. The cultivators of your Ultimate Sword Peak and Demon Sword Peak didn't control their strength. I'm worried that that person's counterattack will be even more powerful. I'm worried that he will injure the disciples of your 2 sword peaks. Chapter 2746. Hearing that, Li Shui sneered. Can he hurt a sword cultivator of my Demon Sword Peak? Once a sword cultivator becomes a devil, his battle power will increase to another level. He can even fight against a true immortal of the celestial realm. You worry too much. Yi Wuchen didn't even look at Wang Dong. He couldn't be bothered to explain. The Ultimate Sword Peak was the head of the 8 sword peaks in this world. Of course, Yi Wuchen had this confidence. At this moment, a few figures rushed in from outside. They were panting, and the shock in their eyes hadn't dissipated yet. Wang Dong could already guess the result by looking at their expressions. He shook his head slightly. It's over? Li Shui frowned slightly. He looked at the sword cultivators of the Sword Peak and asked, Why didn't junior brother Fu Ying come with you? Fu Ying was the sword cultivator chosen by the Demon Sword Peak to challenge Su Zimo. A sword cultivator coughed softly and said, Senior brother Fu Ying lost. What? Li Shui suddenly stood up and said sternly, Impossible. Brotherly, don't be agitated. Calm down. Gong Sun Yu hurriedly said, Let's ask him first. Li Shui's body was surrounded by demonic aura. He was a little irritated. After a while he gradually calmed down. He stared at the sword cultivator and asked, How did Fu Ying lose? How many rounds did they fight? Tell me in detail. Don't miss any details. The sword cultivator hesitated and said weakly, It wasn't a big battle. Senior brother Fu Ying was suppressed in 1 round. What? Defeated in 1 round? Li Shui clenched his fists. His eyes were bloodshot. The sword aura on his body burst out, and he became even more agitated. Calm down, calm down. Wang Dong hurriedly went forward and held Li Shui down. He comforted him and said, Junior brothers of the Sword Peak also fought 1 or 2 rounds. It's the same for everyone. Li Shui gradually calmed down. The sword aura on his body also disappeared. The sword cultivator looked carefully at Li Shui and continued. Then senior brother Fu Ying was so angry that he turned into a devil and sneaked an attack from behind. F***K. Hearing this, Li Shui couldn't hold it in anymore and cursed. Fu Ying, you son of a bitch, you even launched a sneak attack. My Demon Sword Peak's face has been completely lost by him. Wang Tong, Gong Sun Yu, and Qin Zhong curled their lips when they heard this. The other party had already let you go. But because of the unwillingness in your heart, you launched a sneak attack from behind. This was the most despicable act in the sword world. Wang Dong coughed lightly and helped Fu Ying to explain. Maybe junior brother Fu Ying turned into a demon and lost his mind a little. His nature shouldn't be a sneak attack. Li Shui couldn't care less about that. As he cursed, he rushed out of the hall. Gritting his teeth, he said, I'm going to teach that brat a lesson right now. F***ck, let him remember. I don't think there's a need. The sword cultivator coughed lightly and said, Senior brother Fuing has already been taught a lesson by fellow Taoist Su. Huh. Li Shui was stunned and asked subconsciously, Is that Su guy all right? In Li Shui's subconscious mind, if the hidden eagle transformed into a demon and launched a sneak attack from behind, that cultivator surnamed Su would definitely lose. Wang Tong comforted him. Brotherly, don't be so impatient. Listen to junior brother Wang first. Junior brother Wang continued. At that time, senior brother Fuing transformed into a demon and suddenly attacked from behind. Many sword cultivators present did not react in time. The two of them were extremely close, and there was no way to dodge at all. Unexpectedly, fellow Taoist Su seemed to have eyes behind his back. He didn't even turn back. He just flicked his finger and hit senior brother Fu Ying's sword. Senior brother Fu Ying's natal immortal sword was broken on the spot. The conference hall suddenly quietened down. Even though Wang Dong and the others had already predicted Su Zimo's strength, they were still shocked by what they saw. He broke a sword cultivator's natal spiritual treasure with a single finger? Fuing couldn't even last one round after transforming into a demon? What level of strength was this? What kind of physical body was this? Just this detail alone proved that this person's precise control of the situation, judgment, and reaction had reached an extremely high level. Breaking Fu Ying's natal spiritual treasure could be considered as a punishment for Fuing. A sneak attack from behind, even in the demon sword peak, was not as simple as destroying Fu Ying's natal spiritual treasure. Qin Zhong suddenly asked, What grade is Fu Ying's natal spiritual treasure? 7th Tribulation Spiritual Treasure. Li Shui said slowly. The eyes of Wang Tong, Gong Sunyu, and the others twitched uncontrollably. The conference hall quietened down once again. After a while, a soft snort sounded in the conference hall. Yi Wuchun said indifferently, He lost so miserably even after transforming into a demon and launching a sneak attack from behind. Your demon sword peak is really something. When he mentioned this, Li Shui's face flushed red. He instantly exploded. Pitch-black sword chi revolved around his body. He ground his teeth and glared viciously at Yi Wuchun. However, it was the demon sword peak that had lost their face first. He didn't have enough confidence, so he couldn't say anything. Li Shui could only sneer and say, Yi Wuchun, you don't have to be so sarcastic. Your ultimate sword peak won't have any benefits in this person's hands. Yi Wuchun said expressionlessly, No matter how weak my ultimate sword peak's Ding Lu is, as long as he enters the Heartless Sword realm, he won't be unable to last one round. At this moment, junior martial brother Wang, who had rushed in from outside, said weakly, That ultimate sword peak's senior martial brother Ding also didn't last one round. Yi Wuchun's expression changed. He had been expressionless ever since he stepped into the conference hall, as if he was an emotionless person. Hearing this news, Yi Wuchun couldn't control his state of mind. Ha 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 ha. Li Shui couldn't help but laugh loudly. The embarrassment and frustration from before had lessened by quite a bit. Yi Wuchun stood up and asked solemnly, Ding Lu didn't enter the Heartless Sword realm? He entered that state. Junior martial brother Wang nodded and said, However, senior martial brother Ding's state dissipated with a soft shout from fellow Taoist Su. He was then restrained by fellow Taoist Su. A soft shout can dissipate the Heartless Sword realm state? Li Shui retracted his smile and asked, This person came from the Heaven realm. What kind of divine ability did he use? Which Tao of the immortal Buddha and Devil Tao did he cultivate? I don't know. Junior martial brother Wang shook his head and said, That fellow Taoist Su didn't use any divine ability or secret technique. He didn't even use a weapon. The peak true immortals from the 8 great sword peaks gathered together. They weren't as relaxed as before. Their expressions were solemn. It wouldn't look good for them to let an outsider defeat the heaven's pride of the 8 great sword peaks. After a moment of silence, Wang Dong looked at sword immortal Tai Lai and said solemnly, Brother Tai Lai, it seems like we can only invite that junior martial brother Yin from your supreme sword peak. Sword immortal Tai Lai was helpless as he smiled bitterly and said, Junior martial brother Yin is highly valued by Master in the Supreme Sword Peak. He is currently in seclusion to comprehend the immortal execution sword. Master doesn't allow us to disturb him unless it's necessary. Qin Zhong stood up and said loudly, "This matter concerns the reputation of the sword realm. What's there to disturb? The 8 of us will go to the Supreme Sword Peak together. Can't we invite that junior martial brother Yin? I hate that I can't do it myself. It's just that Su's cultivation is too low. If I do it myself, I won't be able to win." Sword Immortal Tai Lai pondered for a moment before nodding and saying, "All right. Let junior martial brother Yin do it. Everyone, follow me to the Supreme Sword Peak." End of chapter. Chapter 2747. Supreme Sword Peak. A young man was cultivating in seclusion in his cave abode. A sharp sword surrounded by lightning floated on his left. The sword light was dazzling and sharp. On his right hand, there was a pitch-black and heavy longsword. It did not reveal any sharpness, and the longsword had not even been sharpened. The young man closed his eyes and circulated his bloodline. Sword chi resonated, and the sword hummed louder and louder. However, his aura became more restrained. Not a single strand of sword chi leaked out from his pores. He was like a heavy sword without an edge. Suddenly, the young man seemed to have sensed something and opened his eyes. The sharpness in his eyes flashed, and he quickly regained his clarity. "Senior brothers, what's the matter?" The young man was surprised. He used his divine consciousness to detect that there were 8 sword cultivators outside his cave abode. As far as he knew, these 8 were the top perfected immortal experts in the 8 sword peaks. However, the young man did not get up, and only asked a question from outside the cave abode. After a moment of silence outside the cave abode, Sword Immortal Tai Lai sent a voice transmission. "Junior brother Yin, something did happen at Sword Crafting Peak. They would like you to help solve it." "What's the matter?" The young man did not seem interested and asked casually. Sword Immortal Tai Lai said, "Junior brother, you should have heard of junior sister Baiming Shui. Her master has come to our sword world. Some of the junior brothers from the 8 great sword peaks went to spar with him, but they all returned in defeat." "Oh." The young man raised his eyebrows slightly, and his tone changed. He seemed to be interested. He knew that the battles in the sword world had always been fair. In other words, Kitsun's master was in the same cultivation realm as him. He was also a true immortal in the consolidation stage. He can defeat all the true immortals in the consolidation stage from the 8 sword peaks. "Interesting," the young man murmured softly. He was extremely battle-hungry. However, in the sword world, no sword cultivator of the same level was a match for him. This made him extremely frustrated. Even if he wanted to challenge someone of a higher level, the sword world would not allow it. He had heard that there was a sword genius named Kitsun in Sword Crafting Peak, who was also invincible in the same level. Unfortunately, she had no hope of entering the true first stage. The 2 of them did not even have a chance to fight. He only wanted to reach the Dongshu stage as soon as possible, so that he could compete with Lin Xuanjin of the Ultimate Sword Peak. Wang Dong and the others heard no sound coming from the cave, thinking that the young man was not interested. Suddenly, Sword Immortal Tai Lai said, "I heard that he is also from the Heaven Realm. Maybe junior brother Yin knows him." At this moment, the door of the cave opened. The young man carried 2 swords on his back and walked out. With a playful smile on his face, he said, "I'll go over and take a look. Who exactly is it from the Heaven Realm that came here?" Seeing that the young man was willing to step forward, everyone heaved a sigh of relief. Sword Immortal Tai Lai said with a smile, "All of you are from the Heavenly Realm. I reckon that junior brother Yin might know this person. I might not recognize him." The young man shook his head slightly and changed the topic. He said proudly, "However, if he is from the Heaven Realm, he must have heard of my name." Haha. Qin Zhong laughed loudly and said, "That's great. When the time comes, we just need to show junior brother Yin's name, and perhaps we can subdue them without fighting." Wang Dong also nodded and said with a smile, "This way, our sword realm can also save some face." The young man said indifferently, "I hope that this person has the guts to fight with me. so that I can display what I have learned and fight to my heart's content. This time, Wang Dong and the others also prepared to go with the young man. Other than Wang Dong, the others had not seen Kitsun's master before. This was a good opportunity to see his means. Have you heard? Senior brother Wang and the others went to the Supreme Sword Peak and invited that monster out. They are going to deal with that Su guy. It's done. With senior brother Yun's appearance, this person will definitely lose. Don't be too confident. The previous senior brothers were all arrogant, but in the end, didn't they return with a crushing defeat and lose face? Junior brother Yin is different from them. Junior brother Yin just stepped into the true first realm and fought with those senior brothers. He defeated them with a crushing force. As the matter fermented over the past few days, the matter at Sword Slaughter Peak caused a huge commotion in the 8 sword peaks. Almost everyone was paying attention and discussing it. After the monster of the Supreme Sword Peak appeared, this matter finally reached the peak. The sword cultivators of the 8 sword peaks, regardless of whether they were ordinary disciples or core disciples, all heard the news and headed to Sword Slaughter Peak to watch the battle and join in the fun. In an instant, Sword Slaughter Peak became the center of the entire sword realm. More and more sword cultivators gathered outside Kitsun's cave abode. They were densely packed as far as the eye could see. Surrounded by the crowd, the young man arrived at the cave abode. A few sword cultivators could not wait any longer and went up to knock on the door. Not long after, the door opened and Kitsun walked out. She frowned and said, "You guys come to challenge me every day. Are you done yet?" The young man had only heard of Kitsun's name. This was the first time he saw her, and he was stunned. With an apologetic expression, Wang Dong went up and promised, "Junior sister Baiming, this is indeed inappropriate. No matter the outcome of today's battle, it'll be the last one." Kitsun said, "After I become a perfected immortal, if any of you want to fight again, I'll fight with you." Qin Zhong walked up casually and said with a smile, "Junior sister Baiming, get your master to come out. This junior brother Yin is also from the heavenly realm. They might know each other." The young man looked at Kitsun and cupped his fists, saying proudly, "Junior sister Baiming, I'm Yin Ting. Go and ask him if he's heard of me." "So it's fellow Taoist Yin Ting. Your name is truly resounding." Right then, a voice sounded from within the cave abode. When he heard that voice, Yin Ting shuddered and his expression changed. Auditory hallucination? What the hell? Right then, a green-robed cultivator strode out and looked at Yin Ting, who was not far away with a relaxed expression and a fake smile. In reality, Su Zimo did not expect to see Yin Ting in the sword world either. After Yin Ting was defeated at the Divine Firmament meeting, he handed him the mortal-slaying sword art and left the heavenly realm. To think that Yin Ting would come to the sword world. Furthermore, in a short period of time, he had already condensed a Tao fruit and entered the perfected immortal realm. No one knew what Yin Ting experienced from the heavenly realm to the sword world. However, it could be seen that he had gained a lot and had indeed undergone a transformation. Su Zimo sized up Yin Ting. In the past, Yin Ting was extremely sharp, just like the Divine Firmament sword behind him. But now, Yin Ting's sharpness was restrained, just like another sword behind him, a heavy sword without a sharp edge. At that moment, Yin Ting's sword Tao had already returned to its original state and was clearly stronger than when the two of them fought back then. Wang Dong and the others did not notice anything unusual and thought that Yin Ting's name was indeed powerful and stunned Su Zimo. Qin Zhong grinned and shouted, "Su, since you've heard of junior brother Yun's name, do you dare to fight him?" Chapter 2748. After seeing Su Zimo, Yin Ting's expression changed continuously. First, he was shocked and in disbelief. Then, he was pleasantly surprised and almost shouted out loud. However, he quickly calmed down after thinking about it. Su Zimo had the creation Qinglian bloodline, and this would lead to a fatal disaster in the heaven realm. At this time, the outside world thought that Su Zimo had died. If he exposed Su Zimo's identity, who knew what kind of unforeseen events would happen? In his heart, he certainly did not want to lose a powerful opponent like Su Zimo. It was precisely because of Su Zimo's existence that he was able to incite him to advance courageously in his sword Dao. Moreover, in his sister's heart, she definitely did not want anything to happen to Su Zimo. At this moment, Yun Ting heard Qin Zhong loudly ask Su Zimo if he dared to fight with him. Su Zimo smiled slightly and looked at Yun Ting, who was not far away. He nodded slightly and said, "Actually, I'm friends with this fellow Taoist Yun Ting." "Oh!" Before Su Zimo could finish, Yun Ting hurriedly shouted and interrupted him. Yun Ting could tell that Su Zimo wanted to say that he had fought with him before. When this sentence was said, others would definitely be curious about the outcome of the battle between the two of them. The fact that he had been defeated twice in a row would definitely not be able to be hidden. After Yun Ting came to the sword world, he had displayed his talent in the sword Dao incisively and vividly, and had received the attention of countless seniors in the sword world. It could be said that he was the moon surrounded by stars. If Su Zimo were to announce the fact that he had defeated him twice in public, he would not be able to afford the humiliation. Yun Ting's shout not only confused Su Zimo, but also the others. Yun Ting trotted all the way to Su Zimo and said loudly, "It's really like the flood rushing to the Dragon King's temple. The two of us are too close." Su Zimo originally wanted to say that they had fought, but when Yun Ting said it, it became a different meaning. Yun Ting looked at Wang Tong, Sword Immortal Tai Lai, and the others. He put his arm around Su Zimo's shoulder and said with a smile, "This is my brother-in-law." Ah! Wang Tong, Sword Immortal Tai Lai, and the others were dumbfounded. The surrounding sword cultivators who were waiting to witness a great battle were also stunned on the spot, dumbfounded. Kitsune frowned slightly and suddenly turned her head. She glanced at Su Zimo and then stared at Yun Ting, a trace of inexplicable hostility flashing in her eyes. Su Zimo frowned slightly. He didn't know what Yun Ting was up to. He was about to speak when Yun Ting winked at him. "Brother Su, I've heard about you from my sister." Yun Ting said through his consciousness, "You have the creation Qinglian bloodline. It's best if you don't expose your identity." Of course, Su Zimo was aware of this. He had never intended to reveal his identity. However, he didn't understand why Yun Ting would come over and claim that he was his brother-in-law if he hid his identity. "Is this fellow cultivator Su your brother-in-law?" Sword Immortal Tai Lai still couldn't believe it. Wasn't this too much of a coincidence? Yun Ting said, "Of course. His name is Su Zhu. He and my sister are in love, and we have a good relationship." Hearing the two words Su Zhu, Su Zimo's mouth twitched. This name was a little too casual. It was obviously a combination of his surname and Yun Zhu's name. Su Zimo didn't say anything. He didn't mention his name to anyone in the sword world anyway. Su Zhu was just a name. As for what he said about them being in love, it was just a casual remark by Yun Ting. He didn't pay much attention to it. However, Kitsune narrowed her eyes and looked at Yun Ting with a scary gaze. Wang Tong, Sword Immortal Tai Lai, and the others looked at each other awkwardly. Who would have thought that after inviting Yun Ting out, there wouldn't be a shocking battle? Instead, there would be a reunion show. Then, Sword Immortal Tai Lai asked tentatively, "Junior brother Yin, are you and fellow cultivator Su still going to fight?" In Wang Tong and the others' hearts, they still hoped that Yun Ting would defeat Su Zimo and save some face for the sword world. Yun Ting waved his hand and said righteously, "This is my brother-in-law. Why should we fight? Do you have nothing better to do than to spar with him?" Yun Ting's words made Sword Immortal Tai Lai choke. Hearing this, Su Zimo finally understood why Yun Ting would come over and call him his brother-in-law. He was just looking for a way out for himself. Sigh. The surrounding sword cultivators sighed with disappointment. They had been teleported here from the various sword peaks, looking forward to an unprecedented battle. They didn't expect that the two of them were actually relatives. Thus, the great battle ended in failure. Let's go, Sai. It seems that none of the consolidation stage perfected immortals of the 8 sword peaks can defeat that Su Zhu. That Su Zhu is really lucky. She actually managed to become junior brother Yun's relative and become family. The sword cultivators of the 8 sword peaks discussed and left one after another. Wang Tong, Sword Immortal Tai Lai, and the others were still standing in the same place. Their minds were in a mess, and they felt a little indignant. Senior brothers, if there's nothing else, I'll go back to my cave abode with brother-in-law. Yin-Ting cupped his hands and said, I haven't seen brother-in-law in a long time, and I'd like to have a good chat. Junior brother Yin, take care. Wang Tong and the others also returned the salute. Brother-in-law, let's go. Yin-Ting hugged Su Zimo and walked toward Kitsune's cave abode. For some unknown reason, ever since Yin-Ting acknowledged Su Zimo as his brother-in-law, he felt a chill down his spine, as though there was a dagger at his back. Yin-Ting turned around and was met with Bai Mingshue's cold eyes. Yin-Ting couldn't help but shudder. When they arrived at the cave abode and sat down, Yin-Ting couldn't help but laugh. Brother Su, that's great. I didn't expect you to be alive. When I saw the message from my sister, I was sad for you for a long time. The patriarch of the academy is really inhumane. Su Zimo could feel that Yin-Ting was sincerely happy for him. Although the two had fought twice, there was no grudge between them. Instead, there was a sense of appreciation for each other. Moreover, Su Zimo and Yin Ju were very close. At this moment, Kitsune suddenly asked, Master, what's with the brother-in-law he mentioned? No, don't listen to his nonsense. Su Zimo smiled and said, he just didn't want to spar with me, so he found an excuse. Oh, Bai Mingxue nodded, as if a burden had been lifted from her mind. Yin-Ting was not happy to hear that. He hurriedly explained, hey, don't misunderstand. Indeed, I called you brother-in-law because I didn't want to spar with you. However, I'm not afraid of you. I'm sure you can tell that I've gained a lot in the sword world over the years, and I'm looking for someone to sharpen my sword Dao. You're the best candidate. However, I heard from my sister that you possess the creation Qinglian bloodline. If we had fought earlier on, you wouldn't have been able to release your full strength, because you were wary and couldn't release your blood chi power. Even if I defeated you, it would be an unfair victory. Chapter 2749. As he said that, Yin-Ting glanced at Kitsune from the corner of his eye, as though he wanted to prove that he was not afraid of Su Zimo at all. However, Bai Mingxue lowered her head and didn't pay any attention to him. Yin-Ting coughed heavily, puffed out his chest and said proudly, Brother Su, if you don't believe me, you and I can go to a secret place and have a big fight. You don't have to worry about anything. You and I can fight to our heart's content without holding back. Another day. Su Zimo smiled without saying anything. He believed that given Yin-Ting's pride, the latter would not be afraid of him just because he had lost to him twice. But now, the gap between the two of them was even greater than back at the Divine Firmament Immortal Gathering. Yin-Ting had indeed improved in his sword Dao. However, his Dao fruit contained the profundities of top-tier cultivation techniques of immortals, Buddhas, fiends, and demons. In fact, it even contained Dao techniques from several forbidden secret manuals, and attracted the 99 heavenly tribulations to enter the true self realm. With the grade 12 creation Qinglian's body, she could take on a pure young spirit treasure head-on, even without using her blood chi. To be precise, his Qinglian's true body was a pure young spirit treasure of the 9 tribulations. Furthermore, he even possessed several quasi-supreme mystic powers right now. If Su Zimo were to face Yin-Ting now, he might only need to use 50% of his strength to suppress the latter. After the calamity this time around, Acheron walked through the gates of hell and came back from the dead in the tomb. His gains were way too great. Even now, he had yet to digest and settle everything completely. Right now, he had already purged the 2 curses in his body and was refining the energy that he had absorbed from the tomb. The energy was massive enough that once he refined it all, he would be able to break through and advance another level to the heavenly being stage of true self-realm. The gap between him and Yin-Ting would only grow bigger. Back then, Su Zimo viewed Yin-Ting as his greatest opponent. But now, his horizons were even wider. He could point his sword at all races and rule over the 3,000 worlds, looking down on the past and present. What's wrong? When Yin-Ting saw that Su Zimo was just smiling without saying anything, he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows and ask provocatively, Are you scared? Su Zimo smiled and said, You want to find an opponent to practice your sword Dao. I do have a suitable person by my side. Who? Yin Ting asked. Su Zimo looked at Kitsune, who was not far away. Her. Yin Ting found it hard to believe. Kitsune was indeed talented in the sword Dao, but she was cultivating that Wu Dao. She was stuck at the heaven origin stage, and couldn't even condense a Dao fruit. She couldn't threaten him at all. There was a huge gap between the two of them. Su Zimo said, Dark North is my eldest disciple. Of course not now. When she becomes a true immortal, you two can spar. That's ridiculous. Yin Ting rolled his eyes and said, Among those of the same level apart from you, who else is my match? Besides, Su Zimo, you're looking down on me too much. I see you as my greatest opponent, but you sent a disciple to send me away. Before Yin Ting could finish his words, he suddenly felt a chill. Not far away, Kitsune was looking at him. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were cold. Yin Ting hesitated, then smiled sheepishly. Junior sister Dark North, of course I'm not looking down on you. It's just that our cultivation realms are different now, so we can't spar. If you have any questions about Sword Dao later, you can come to me. What does Su Zimo know when it comes to Sword Dao? He can't beat me. Kitsune slowly clenched her fists and said nothing. She looked deeply at Yin Ting, then got up and walked outside. Where are you going, junior sister Dark North? Yin Ting asked instinctively. Kitsune looked indifferent. She didn't even look at Yin Ting, and left the cave abode. Yin Ting looked back at Su Zimo and asked, Is junior sister Dark North angry? I didn't say anything. Su Zimo smiled. She's always been like this. She might not be against you. Then what is she going to do? Yin Ting asked again. Su Zimo thought for a moment and said, She's probably going to cultivate. In fact, he could vaguely guess what Kitsune was thinking. Kitsune probably wanted to cultivate faster and enter the true martial realm as soon as possible. Then she could condense the true Wu Dao body and fight Yin Ting. For some reason, Su Zimo vaguely felt that Kitsune seemed to be very hostile to Yin Ting. It was probably their first meeting. Although Yin Ting talked a lot, he shouldn't have offended Kitsune in any way. Maybe it's just my imagination. Su Zimo shook his head. Right then, Yin Ting suddenly approached and rubbed his palms with a bashful expression. He stammered. Brother Su, does your eldest disciple have a Dao partner? No. Su Zimo looked at the bashful Yin Ting and smiled faintly. He had clearly seen through Yin Ting's thoughts. Yin Ting sensed Su Zimo's gaze and knew that he couldn't hide it anymore. He said, Brother Su, I've known about you and my sister for a long time. Don't worry, I'll definitely support the two of you. I've been obsessed with the Dao of the sword all these years, and have never had a Dao partner. Your eldest disciple is single as well. Why don't you help set them up? At this point, Yin Ting seemed to have thought of something and added hurriedly. But there's one thing. After we become Dao partners, we'll have to be single. My seniority can't be any lower. What are you thinking about? There's nothing going on between me and Yunju. Su Zimo was a little helpless. As for what you're talking about, it'll be up to Baiming herself. I won't interfere with her. What's wrong with that? Yin Ting replied, You're her master. Arranging a marriage for her is as easy as saying the word. When Su Zimo heard that, he replied sternly, No matter who it is, be it her master or her parents, nobody can decide her fate in life. Baiming is not a 3-year-old child. She has her own choices. In the minds of most people like Yin Ting, it was still the order of the parents and the words of the matchmaker. However, Su Zimo's upbringing was different from others. He did not want to impose his will on others. When Yin Ting saw how serious Su Zimo was, he changed his tone and asked, In that case, you won't stop me from being with her? Su Zimo nodded. Yin Ting beamed. That's simple. If junior sister Baiming enters the true self realm, you can come and spar with me. Suddenly, Yin Ting changed his mind and agreed. In his opinion, when the two of them fought, he could subdue Kitsune with his unparalleled sword Dao and display his unparalleled splendor. By then, would Kitsune not be tempted? It would be fine even if Kitsune did not admit defeat the first time. If Kitsune did not admit defeat, she would challenge him for a second and third match. As time passed, the two of them would spend more time together. Would he have to worry about not having a chance? At that time, if Kitsune was still not interested in him, he would use his ultimate move and challenge Suzumo directly. As long as he defeated Suzumo, it would be enough to shock Kitsune immensely. Chapter 2750. Yin-Ting smiled foolishly as he fantasized. But soon, he came back to his senses and sighed with a troubled expression. But junior sister Baiming is cultivating some Wu Dao. How long will it take for her to become a true immortal? By the time junior sister Baiming reaches the true self realm, I'll already be an immortal king. What's the point? Thinking of this, Yin-Ting looked at Suzumo with some resentment. You're too much. You cultivate the immortal Dao and Buddha Dao, but you let your eldest disciple cultivate some bullshit Wu Dao. Suzumo said indifferently, Go back and prepare. You won't have to wait long for this battle. He had been paying attention to Kitsune's cultivation. During this time, with his help, Baiming Shue's body and bloodline had been reborn. Her Fate Wheel realm was close to the completion. Kitsune had also made breakthroughs in the cultivation of the three major sword techniques. She just lacked an opportunity to enter the true martial realm. I hope so. Yin-Ting sighed softly, still in disbelief. Seeing this, Suzumo said meaningfully, Brother Yin, I have to remind you of something. I arranged for Baiming to spar with you, but I didn't mean to match you or find you an opponent. Then what is it? Yin-Ting asked. Suzumo said slowly, Baiming needs someone to test her sword to become a true immortal. She needs to prove herself in the sword realm, and you are the most suitable opponent for her. In fact, even Suzumo didn't know what level Kitsune's sword cultivation would reach after she entered the true martial realm. The best way was to find a suitable opponent to test her sword on. Yin-Ting was such a person. Test her sword on me? Yin-Ting exploded the moment he heard and said with a cold smile. You master and disciple pair are looking down on people too much. You've beaten me twice, but your disciple wants to beat me and test her sword on me? From a certain perspective, Dark North is not my disciple. Suzumo said. She is the first inheritor of Wu Dao, and you are just her first obstacle in the way of the sword in Wu Dao. Alright. Yin-Ting sneered. I'd like to see how big of a surprise junior sister Baiming can give me. It's not really a surprise. Suzumo shook his head and said, Just don't disappoint her when the time comes. Yin-Ting. Yin-Ting was so angry that his teeth chattered. Without saying a word, he turned around and left. If he continued talking to Suzumo, he was worried that he wouldn't be able to hold himself back and would attack Suzumo. As soon as he left the cave abode, he saw Wang Tong and Sword Immortal Tai Lai standing side by side not far away. Seeing Yin-Ting appear, the two of them came to greet him. Junior brother Yin, did something happen? Wang Tong asked when he noticed Yin-Ting's strange expression. What's the matter? Nothing. Yin-Ting waved his hand and changed the topic. Senior brothers, what are you doing here? The two exchanged a look, and Wang Tong said, Junior brother Yin, since you are close to Taoist Suzhu, can you persuade her to stop torturing junior sister Baiming? Even the 8 peak masters have praised junior sister Baiming's talent in the way of the sword. We are worried that if junior sister Baiming continues to cultivate like this, she will be crippled. Crippled? Hearing this, Yin-Ting was furious. He sneered. How can he be a cripple? Wu Dao is powerful. When junior sister Baiming becomes a true immortal, I'm afraid even I won't be her match. Wang Tong and Sword Immortal Tai Lai were confused by Yin-Ting's words. They didn't know where Yin-Ting's evil spirit came from. Yin-Ting said, I'm not going to persuade him. I want to see how junior sister Baiming can attract the heavenly tribulation and become a true immortal when she can't condense a Dao fruit. Well, Wang Tong and Sword Immortal Tai Lai exchanged a look. Yin-Ting and his brother-in-law were fine just now. Were they quarreling now? After a pause, Yin-Ting said, Also, senior brothers, please restrain the sword cultivators of the various sword peaks. Don't think about challenging him in the same realm, lest you embarrass yourselves. Sword cultivators of the same realm may not win even if they form a sword formation, let alone one-on-one. On the sword slaughtering peak, there was another world. This was the center of the sword-slaughtering continent, and also the place where the sword chi of massacre was the strongest. Without a grotto heaven realm cultivation, it was impossible to gain a foothold on the peak. At this moment, there were 8 cultivators gathered at the peak of the mountain. They were either sitting or standing, and they were sipping tea as they chatted idly with relaxed expressions. Among the 8, there were 7 men and 1 woman. They were the peak masters of the 8 sword peaks. The peak master of the ultimate sword peak was also the only woman among the 8. She looked at the figure at the foot of the sword-slaughtering peak, who was going against the flow and rushing against the waterfall of sword chi. She sighed softly. Kitsune has suffered a lot these days. Amipa. The peak master of the Zen sword peak chanted a Buddhist proclamation softly and said, however, her physical body and bloodline are clearly transforming. Although she still can't condense a Dao fruit, her combat strength is stronger than before. It shouldn't be a bad thing for Kitsune. The peak master of the sword-slaughtering peak snorted coldly and said, if not, I would have expelled her master from the sword world long ago. I don't care even if I'm criticized. You're still so hot-tempered. The others laughed. The peak master of the extreme sword peak said, speaking of which, her master is also from the heaven realm like Yin Ting. I didn't expect her to have such a relationship with Yin Ting. The peak master of the illusory sword peak frowned and said, I heard that Yin Ting's sister is one of the 4 fairies of the heaven realm. I didn't hear that he has a Dao companion. I'm not sure about that. The others shook their heads slightly. Heaven realm. The peak master of the demon sword peak pondered and said, I heard that Qinglian was born in the heaven realm. She condensed into a human body and has already cultivated to grade 12. I heard about that too. The peak master of the 5 elements sword peak said with a regretful expression, it's a pity that the cultivator with Qinglian's body was forced into the emperor's tomb and has already died. A grade 12 creation Qinglian is so precious. Even the immortal slayer emperor Lord Back then did not manage to nurture her. Ice. The peak master of the overlord sword peak said, it's a pity that a paragon died. We can only blame the heavens for toying with us. If he was born in the sword world, he wouldn't have ended up like this. That's right. The peak master of the ultimate sword peak said, if he was born in the sword world, the experts of the 8 sword peaks would definitely protect him, so that he could grow smoothly and recreate the glory of the immortal slayer emperor lord back then. At the mention of the immortal slayer emperor lord, the few of them subconsciously looked at the peak master of the sword-slaughtering peak. After all, the sword-slaughtering peak under their feet was established by the immortal slayer emperor lord. At that moment, the peak master of the sword-slaughtering peak looked at the withered yellow lotus flowers growing on the peak with a complicated expression. On the peak, the slaughter sword chi was violent and sharp. Even perfected immortals could not withstand it. However, the fact that the withered yellow lotus flowers grew there was also a strange sight. The peak master of the sword-slaughtering peak reminisced and sighed heavily. These lotus flowers were personally planted by the immortal slayer emperor lord when he established the sword-slaughtering peak back then. It's a pity that after the immortal slayer emperor lord died and the creation Qinglian was destroyed, these lotus flowers withered and never bloomed again. Chapter 2751. Ever since Yin Ting came out of seclusion and acknowledged a brother-in-law, the matter had been left unsettled. Although Wang Dong and the others couldn't bear to see Kitsune suffer, they couldn't do anything in the face of Su Zimo, who was almost invincible in the consolidation stage. Everyone could only pray that Baiming Shui would retreat in the face of difficulties and rein in the horse at the edge of the cliff. Kitsune was so talented in swordsmanship that no one wanted to see her waste her precious time on Wu Dao's cultivation. In the blink of an eye, 3 years had passed. For the past 3 years, Su Zimo had been staying in Baiming Shui's cave abode without leaving. The consolidation stage perfected immortals of the 8 sword peaks knew that they couldn't defeat him, so no one came to challenge him. He had a peaceful life. While teaching Baiming Shui, he maintained his own cultivation. Finally, one day Su Zimo felt the opportunity to break through. In fact, The true yuan in his body had been accumulated to the peak 2 years ago. He was just waiting for the right time. Kitsune felt something and woke up from her cultivation state. She quickly activated the immortal formation in the cave residence. This immortal formation was completed by Su Zimo a year ago. It was to prevent Qinglian's bloodline from leaking when he broke through. Su Zimo slowly raised his head and looked up. Above his head, there was only the thick stone wall of the cave residence. He couldn't see anything at all. However, Su Zimo's eyes seemed to be able to see through the layers of void. He saw the sky outside the cave residence, the firmament of the sword realm, and the black and yellow of heaven and earth. In those clear eyes, there was a faint reflection of the bright starry sky. There was the inverted Milky Way, the flow of time, and the alternation of time and space. At this moment, Su Zimo's spirit, with the power of the Tao fruit, seemed to break through the layers of obstacles and connect with the vast universe, creating a certain resonance. In Su Zimo's sea of consciousness, a sparkling fruit spun slowly, exuding a powerful aura. And as time passed, this aura was still rising rapidly. At this moment, it was as if everything had disappeared. Even Su Zimo's physical body had disappeared. In the vast world, there was only one sparkling and resplendent Tao fruit left. Be it the immortal sex, the Buddhist sex, or the fiend sex. The only difference was their nature, Tao hearts, and mental states. However, the profoundness of the Tao techniques were largely the same. When he was in the lower realm, immortals, Buddhas, and devils all talked about the Tao of pills. This was the first time he had broken free from the shackles of heaven and earth, and his lifespan had increased to 500 years. After that, there was the saying of Dharma characteristics. The most important core of the Tao of immortals, Buddhists, and devils was to comprehend, communicate, and establish a connection with the heaven and earth. A cosmic form was formed by borrowing the power of the heavens and the earth. In the lower realms, cultivators could only comprehend minor kiliocosms. After ascending to the upper realm, cultivators would be able to comprehend a broader, more complete, and more boundless middle realm. The so-called celestial being stage was when the cultivator resonated with heaven and earth through the Tao fruit. A Tao fruit was the crystallization of the essence of a cultivator's cultivation. When this resonance occurred, it was equivalent to the Tao fruit being recognized by this vast world, and the power in the Tao fruit would increase exponentially. At the same time, the vast power in the Tao fruit would be fed back to the cultivator's body, allowing the true immortal who had stepped into the celestial being stage to be greatly improved, be it the physical body, bloodline, or primordial spirit. The process of stepping into the celestial being stage lasted for an entire day. Su Zimo's aura was also increasing continuously. Just as immortal King Ling Long had expected, the 12th grade Qinglian was not the end, but only the starting point of Qinglian's creation. The qi and blood of Qinglian's true body were still increasing, and there was no upper limit at all. The cultivation of his primordial spirit was still far ahead of his own cultivation realm. After stepping into the celestial being stage, Qinglian's primordial spirit had already reached the perfected true immortal stage, which was the Dongxi stage of the true self stage. The true self stage was divided into 4 small stages, and the reason why they were so clear and corresponded to different names was that there was a huge difference in power between the 4 small stages. Since ancient times, it was very rare for geniuses of the primordial spirit stage to be one small stage ahead of the true self stage. However, Su Zimo's Qinglian's primordial spirit was 2 whole small stages ahead of his own cultivation. During the process of Su Zimo breaking through to the celestial being stage, he emitted a huge amount of true yuan energy, which filled Kitsune's cave abode. Moreover, during the process of communicating with the world, the resonance was so strong that even the immortal formation set up in the cave abode could not withstand it, and cracks appeared on it. A wisp of the true yuan aura of the green lotus true body leaked out through these cracks. At this moment, Su Zimo opened his eyes, took a deep breath, and swallowed all the primordial qi in the northern underworld cave abode. Kitsune stayed by Su Zimo's side and did not leave his side at all. For an entire day, she was lucky enough to witness the entire process of Su Zimo's breakthrough. This kind of close observation and feeling was too rare. That mysterious process of comprehending and communicating with the heavens and earth was extremely mysterious, and it touched her deeply. Suzumo's breakthrough this time was also a great opportunity for Kitsune. It directly made Kitsune feel the opportunity to step into the true martial realm. And the wisp of true yuan that leaked out from Kitsune's cave abode drifted and merged into the sword-slaughtering peak. On the peak of the sword-slaughtering peak, the peak master was resting with his eyes closed. Suddenly, he seemed to have sensed something and opened his eyes, his gaze landing on a few withered yellow lotus flowers not far away. The peak master of the sword-slaughtering peak's expression changed and his gaze froze. At that moment, a few of the withered yellow lotus flowers were growing green. Even though there were no buds, a few spots of green grew on the stems of Qinglian's lotus flowers, and new lotus leaves appeared. What's going on? Suddenly, the peak master of the sword-slaughtering peak stood up and stared at the few green lotus flowers in surprise and delight. Right then, he sensed something and spun around, looking in the direction of Kitsune's cave abode. His eyes shone with a bedazzling sword light. The aura of a heavenly tribulation. Has Kitsune broken through? The peak master of the sword-slaughtering peak was shocked, and his face was filled with disbelief. In their opinion, Kitsune had gone astray by cultivating the Wu Dao. Even if she cultivated a 9th-level fate wheel, and was stronger than those of the same cultivation realm, she would never be able to enter the true martial realm if she could not condense a Dao fruit. But now, the aura of the true one heavenly tribulation could be felt from Kitsune's side. It's done! After the initial shock, the peak master of the sword-slaughtering peak was overjoyed. No matter what, as long as Kitsune attracted the true one heavenly tribulation, there was hope for her to become a perfected immortal. Moreover, what made the peak master of the sword-slaughtering peak even more excited was that he felt that he had found the reason for the revival of the lotus flowers. It must be Kitsune. Kitsune had just broken through and was about to attract the true one heavenly tribulation. But the lotus flowers on the peak had already revived. How could there be such a coincidence in the world? How could there be such an auspicious sign when Kitsune was breaking through? What kind of momentum was this? At this rate, after Kitsune's heavenly tribulation was over, all the Qinglian flowers on the peak would probably revive and bloom on the sword-slaughtering peak again. The peak master of the sword-slaughtering peak even suspected that Kitsune was the reincarnation of the Emperor Immortal Slayer. Heaven's will, heaven's will! The peak master of the sword-slaughtering peak was emotional as he muttered to himself. Heaven is protecting the sword world. Chapter 2752. 5 Elements Sword Peak. The peak master of 5 Elements Sword Peak suddenly reached out and plucked a ball of light from the void. He touched it with his divine consciousness and received the news inside. Kitsune broke through and attracted the truth one heavenly tribulation? The peak master of 5 Elements Sword Peak was shocked. He wouldn't have believed it if the news hadn't come from the sword-slaughtering peak master. The peak master of 5 Elements Sword Peak pondered for a while and decided to announce the news. Cultivators who wanted to watch Kitsune undergo the tribulation could head to the sword-slaughtering peak. At the same time, the other 6 peak masters also received the news from the sword-slaughtering peak master. Kitsune can also attract the truth one heavenly tribulation by cultivating that Wu Dao. As far as I know, Kitsune can't condense a Dao fruit with the 9 fate wheels she cultivated, right? How can she enter the truth one realm without a Dao fruit? I'm not sure. Since Brother Lu sent the news, it shouldn't be wrong. Let's go and take a look. The other 7 peak masters were doubtful and didn't believe it. However, the 7 of them still chose to announce the news. As for the cultivators of the other peak masters, it was up to them to decide who would be willing to watch. Generally speaking, when a sword cultivator of the sword realm underwent the truth one heavenly tribulation, the other sword cultivators could watch from the side. However, if the truth one heavenly tribulation was only 5 or 6 levels, it wasn't attractive to most sword cultivators. If it was 7 levels, it would attract many cultivators. For example, Yun Ting's tribulation back then was so grand that almost half of the true immortals of the 8 sword cultivation peaks came. Many sword cultivators who were in seclusion came out at the last minute. Have you heard? Kitsune of the sword slaughtering peak is going to undergo the tribulation. Really? Her cultivation path is completely different from ours. I wonder how many levels of tribulation she can attract. She's so talented in sword Dao. Her tribulation won't be too weak. That's not necessarily true. The Wu Dao she cultivates was created by a lower realm cultivator. How can it be compared to the immortal Buddhist and demon Dao techniques that have been passed down through the ages? In my opinion, her truth 1 heavenly tribulation might not even be 5 heavenly tribulation. After the news spread, it caused a huge commotion among the 8 sword peaks. Firstly, Kitsune was considered a celebrity in the 8 great sword peaks, and many sword cultivators secretly admired her. Secondly, Kitsune practiced Wu Dao. Many swordsmen were curious. Kitsune was practicing Wu Dao. How many levels of heavenly tribulation could he attract? Many cultivators set off one after another, passing through the teleportation formation of their respective sword peaks. He went to the sword-slaying peak to watch. Yun Ting also came out of seclusion and looked in the direction of the sword-slaying peak. Thinking of the battle with Su Zimo 3 years ago, he snorted softly. Fortunately, I didn't have to wait for too long. What level can a disciple trained by Su Zimo reach? Wait for junior sister Baiming to finish her tribulation? I'll fight her? I'll beat her until she's convinced. You abducted my sister, so I'll abduct your disciple? We're even. While speaking, Yun Ting also set off for the Supreme Sword Peak's teleportation formation. At the same time, Gong Sunyu, Sword Immortal Tai Lai, Yi Wuchen, Shen Yu Li Shui, Qin Zhong, and Monk Zhu Jian also arrived at the sword-slaying peak. At this time, Kitsune's cave abode was 1,000 miles wide. It was listed as a forbidden area. 10 Immortal King experts from the sword-slaying peak came out and guarded the 10 nodes around it. No one was allowed to step in to prevent accidents and disturb Kitsune's tribulation. 1,000 miles away, in the sky and on the ground, it was densely packed with people. Heavenly tribulation of Truth 1? It had already started. How is it? Qin Zhong was the last to arrive. He looked at Wang Dong and the others and asked, "Which level of tribulation is it?" "It's the 3rd level now." Wang Dong answered in a low voice, looking at the figure in the middle of the tribulation with a serious expression. Qin Zhong chuckled and said, "I didn't expect Sister Baiming to attract the heavenly tribulation of Truth 1 even though she hasn't condensed a Dao fruit. Her master was right." Wang Dong and the others didn't say anything. They looked at Kitsune, who was in the middle of the tribulation, with a strange expression. Qin Zhong followed everyone's gaze and looked at the center of the tribulation. He couldn't help but change his expression. At this time, the 3rd tribulation had already reached the 9th level. Kitsune's surroundings had formed a sea of blue lightning. It was dazzling and set off monstrous waves. The momentum was terrifying. However, Kitsune was still standing in the same place, motionless. She didn't even take out her weapon. This? Qin Zhong was secretly shocked and couldn't help but ask, "Sister Baiming is going through the tribulation like this?" Wang Dong said, "Sister Baiming's body is indeed strong because she cultivates the Wu Dao. As far as I know, in the history of the 8 major sword peaks, there are very few heavenly talents who can withstand the first 3 heavenly tribulations with their bodies. The closest one is Brother Yun of the Extreme Sword Peak." While everyone was talking, the 3rd tribulation was over, and the 4th tribulation was coming. Kitsune still didn't defend herself, and went through the tribulation with her body. That was Su Zimo's request for her. Wu Dao used his body as the world and cultivated continuously. The process of tribulation transcendence was also a form of cultivation, and it was a rare opportunity. That was the only way to unleash the full potential of one's body and bloodline to the greatest extent. Boom, boom, boom. Amidst everyone's exclamations, Kitsune endured the first 4 heavenly tribulations. Of course, it wasn't easy for Kitsune to endure it. There were already some wounds on her body, and she was charred by the heavenly tribulations. She looked a little wretched. In the blink of an eye, the 5th heavenly tribulation arrived. Kitsune still didn't release any mystic skills, or sword to defend? Is Sister Baiming crazy? Qin Zhong couldn't help but say. If she continues to endure like this, she'll be severely injured. How can she withstand the subsequent heavenly tribulations? Sword Immortal Tai Lai sighed as well. Previously, Brother Yun Ting endured the fifth heavenly tribulation with his body and almost died. Wang Dong and the others looked nervous and didn't say a word. Boom, boom, boom. The fifth heavenly tribulation smashed down one after another, and Kitsune gradually couldn't withstand it anymore. Her flesh was lacerated by the power of the heavenly tribulation, and she was drenched in blood. She was knocked down time and time again, and struggled to stand up time and time again. The ninth heavenly tribulation even pierced her chest, revealing a bowl-sized hole. It was a shocking sight. The fifth heavenly tribulation finally dissipated. As for Kitsune, she sprawled in the charred pit motionlessly. At that moment, all the sword cultivators felt their hearts skip a beat. Even the 8 peak masters of sword refinement peak could not help but stand up and look over with nervous expressions. Junior Sister Baiming is way too hardworking. Yin Ting was secretly speechless. Back when he underwent the fifth heavenly tribulation, he also endured it and almost died. This was because his physical body and bloodline were strong. His bloodline was filled with the power of the sword blood and the power of lightning. Therefore, a portion of the power of the fifth heavenly tribulation was absorbed by his body and bloodline, allowing him to survive by luck. What did Junior Sister Baiming do? Who was this Wu Dao? Right then, Kitsune's body moved, and she crawled up from the pit slowly. Although her face was pale, she was expressionless and her gaze was resolute, as though she couldn't feel any pain. Her wounds were filled with boundless vitality, and the hole in her chest was healing rapidly as well. Chapter 2753. What a strong life force! The peak masters on the sword slaughtering peak could not help but exclaim when they saw this scene. This doesn't seem to be Kitsune's recovery ability. Someone must have sealed a huge amount of life force in her body in advance. Who could have such a strong life force and seal it in another person's body? Even we can't do such a thing. The 8 peak masters looked at each other. The sword-slaughtering peak master's gaze instinctively fell on the green-robed cultivator in the crowd and murmured, "Could it be him?" To be honest, the sword-slaughtering peak master did not take this person from the heaven realm seriously at first. He was just a true immortal in the unity stage. Because he was worried that Kitsune would be held back by this person, the sword-slaughtering peak master even looked down on him. However, when he saw that Kitsune had a chance to become a true immortal, the sword-slaughtering peak master's opinion of this person gradually changed. At this moment, he even guessed that the person who sealed Kitsune's life force was this Su Zhu. Of course, the person who could do such a thing was Su Zimo. Looking at Kitsune, who was struggling to stand up, Su Zimo sighed softly. Although they both cultivated Wu Dao, Kitsune's body and bloodline were far inferior to Wu Dao's original body. Firstly, the original body created Wu Dao, and was considered the ancestor of Wu Dao. Secondly, Wu Dao's original body's martial soul was a flame that constantly tempered his flesh and blood. It could also smelt divine powers and secret techniques, and fuse them into his flesh and blood. Thirdly, the two of them had different experiences. Wu Dao's original body was not only a body of flesh and blood, but also a furnace that had smelted too many divine powers, secret techniques, and forbidden secret techniques. Kitsune's martial soul, on the other hand, was a sword. Kitsune's greatest advantage was her sword Dao. Baiming Shue's physical body and bloodline were far inferior to the Green Lotus true body. Back then, when Qinglian's true body went through the heavenly tribulation, she stood still on the spot and endured the first 6 true one heavenly tribulations with her mortal body. She was unharmed. Moreover, Qinglian's true body also possessed a terrifying self-healing ability. Seeing that the 6th tribulation was about to descend, Su Zimo called out, "Dark North, make your move." He had once told Kitsune that the more heavenly tribulations he could endure with his physical body, the more beneficial it would be for Wu Dao's cultivation. But now, he saw that Kitsune had reached her limit. If he continued to transcend the tribulation, It was very likely that he would fall in the sixth tribulation. Kitsune turned her head and looked at Suzimo from afar. Her gaze was firm and unyielding as she gently shook her head. This was her choice. Rumble. The sixth heavenly tribulation descended. Kitsune stomped her feet and soared into the skies. She was like an unsheathed sword that shone with a cold and bedazzling gleam as she charged towards the heavenly tribulation. Boom! Kitsune collided with the heavenly tribulation and fell rapidly, crashing heavily onto the ground. She coughed out mouthfuls of blood. However, she did not retreat, fear, or submit. Instead, she continued to charge forward with an indomitable will. That was Wu Dao. That was Kitsune's sword Dao. It was just like back in Tianhuang Mainland's Dark North town. Even though her dantian was shattered and her clansmen were bullied, she did not submit, admit defeat, or give up. No one could shake her willpower. The heavenly tribulation could penetrate her chest, but it could not penetrate her sword heart. At that instant, the 8 peak leaders at the top of the mountain were startled. Many sword cultivators in the world felt a shock that reached the depths of their souls, and their blood seemed to be burning. Many sword cultivators were convinced by the spirit of her sword Dao. Looking at that unyielding figure, they felt touched for a long time and tears welled up in their eyes. It was a familiar scene. It was as though they were watching Kitsune go against the current stubbornly at the bottom of sword crafting peak, charging against the waterfall of sword chi continuously. Bang! 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 Kitsune fell time and time again, crashing onto the ground only to stand up time and time again. Her body was already tattered, and her original appearance could no longer be seen. However, she did not submit and continued to press forward. Bang! The 8th heavenly tribulation descended. That heavenly tribulation almost split Kitsune into two. A massive wound was slashed diagonally from Kitsune's shoulder, and her organs spilled all over the ground in a horrifying manner. Kitsune laid in the pit on her back, her body a bloody mess. Motionless, she seemed to have lost her breath. However, the 9th heavenly tribulation was still nurturing and could descend at any moment. At that moment, all the sword cultivators held their breaths and looked at the figure in the pit. They clenched their fists instinctively, hoping for a miracle. Suddenly Kitsune moved. Her face was expressionless as she slowly sat up and placed her internal organs back into her body. The life force that Suzimo sealed in her body was almost gone. Although her wounds were still healing, the speed had slowed down. Kitsune pursed her lips tightly and used all her remaining strength to support her broken body bit by bit. With every movement, her body would tremble slightly, as though she was in immense pain. Finally, Kitsune stood up once more and looked up at the heavens. Her body was like a sword and her gaze was like a sword. At that moment, many sword cultivators on Sword Crafting Continent could not help but cheer. Everyone was happy for Kitsune from the bottom of their hearts and celebrated for her. The 8 peak masters heaved a sigh of relief as well. However, at the same time, the 8 peak masters were worried that Kitsune might not be able to survive the 9th heavenly tribulation if she continued to endure it. Buzz! 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 Suddenly, the sound of swords humming could be heard from the direction of Myriad Sword Palace. It was as though metal was clashing and resounded through the world. The 8 peak masters widened their eyes as though they had thought of something. They were shocked and revealed looks of disbelief as they instinctively looked in the direction of the sound. This is sword steel resonance, the 8 peak masters exclaimed. When these words spread, it caused a huge commotion in the crowd. The reason why Myriad Sword Palace was known as the center of Sword World and was surrounded by the 8 peak masters was because there was a sword steel erected in Myriad Sword Palace, known as the Zenith Heaven Sword Steel. The Zenith Heaven Sword Steel was erected by the Great Emperor of all heaven in the past, and was engraved with the forbidden secret manuals passed down by the Great Emperor. Ever since the Zenith Heaven Sword Steel was erected, it had only rung twice. The first time was when the Great Emperor of all heaven resonated with the Zenith Heaven Sword Steel, when he became a Great Emperor. The second time was when the Immortal Slayer Emperor created the 3 great sword arts when he was still an immortal king. They gave birth to supreme divine abilities and resonated with the Zenith Heaven Sword Steel. And now it was the third time. Kitsune had not created any divine abilities or secret manuals, nor had she become a great emperor. However, the will of Wu Dao and the spirit of Sword Dao that she had just displayed had received the Zenith Heaven Sword Steel's approval and resonated with it. Immediately after, the swords on the waists, backs, and storage bags of all the sword cultivators in Sword World began to tremble involuntarily. The sword steel resonated with the 10,000 swords. The Zenith Heaven Sword Steel had been awakened by Kitsune and was emitting sword hums to support her. At that moment, Kitsune's aura reached its peak. Chapter 2754. After the Daluo Sword Steel rang out, a wave of excitement and restlessness came from the depths of the Myriad Sword Palace, inadvertently emitting a few strands of terrifying aura. On the peak of Sword Slaughtering Peak, the 8 Peak Masters looked in the direction of the Myriad Sword Palace with smiles and gratification. The other sword cultivators couldn't sense it, but the 8 of them could sense that the Imperial Emperors of the Myriad Sword Palace had been alarmed by the commotion here. Among them, there were even a few old fellows who had awakened. Generally speaking, sword cultivators of the Sword World could only enter the Myriad Sword Palace to continue cultivating after reaching the Emperor Realm. I didn't expect that even those people would be alarmed. The 5 Elements Sword Peak Master sighed. The Daluo Sword Steel has only rung 3 times. How can those people be unmoved? The Demon Sword Peak Master said. The Overlord Sword Peak Master laughed. Those old fellows are really good at enduring. They still can't put down their airs as Imperial Emperors and refuse to show up. Even if they don't show up, they'll still be watching Kitsune's tribulation from the Myriad Sword Palace and protect her. Kitsune's tribulation this time is truly the center of attention. I'm looking forward to seeing how many levels of tribulation she'll attract. To be able to obtain the recognition of the Daluo Sword Steel, do you think she'll attract 9x9? As soon as he said this, the 8 Peak Masters were all shocked. Their eyes were filled with anticipation. The legendary 9x9 Heavenly Tribulation. They had lived for hundreds of thousands of years, but they had never seen 9x9 Heavenly Tribulation. In the current Myriad Sword Palace, there was an Imperial Emperor who had attracted 9x9 Heavenly Tribulation. However, that was several million years ago. One had to know that even Lin Xuanjin and Yun Ting, who were extremely talented in the Sword Dao in this life, had only attracted 8x9 Heavenly Tribulation. The Sword Slaughtering Peak Master said in a deep voice. The number of Heavenly Tribulations doesn't prove anything. Most of the Imperial Emperors in the 3,000 worlds were only 7x9 or 8x9 back then. It'll be best if Kitsune can attract 9x9 Heavenly Tribulation. Even if it stops at 8x9, she'll still be the sword cultivator with the greatest potential in this life of the Sword World. The Heavenly Tribulation continued. The Daluo Sword Steel emitted a sword hum, which then caused the 10,000 swords to hum in unison. Kitsune faced the 9th Heavenly Tribulation and slashed forward. In the eyes of the crowd, Kitsune's figure seemed to have disappeared. What replaced it was a long sword that seemed to be able to pierce through everything. Boom! Under Kitsune's perseverance, she finally relied on her physical body to withstand the first 6 Heavenly Tribulations. And with the help of the power of the first 6 Heavenly Tribulations, her true Wu Dao body was also rapidly being reconstructed. Wu Dao's runes mixed with the lightning of the Heavenly Tribulation, continuously fusing into his body and bloodline. It stimulated the potential of this body. He didn't give Kitsune much time to breathe. The 7th Tribulation arrived in the blink of an eye. This time, Kitsune didn't choose to take the attack head-on, but instead used the secret arts she had learned over the years, facing the 79 Heavenly Tribulations. Boom! 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 Under the destructive thunder and lightning, a figure radiating boundless sharpness charged at the lightning. She challenged the Heavenly Tribulation and displayed an unshakable will. The 7th Tribulation ended, and the tribulation clouds in the sky still hadn't dissipated. No surprise, the 8th Tribulation descended. This time, Bai Mingxue unsheathed her life-bound longsword under the watchful eyes of the crowd. She displayed her understanding of the Sword Dao. She displayed it all. Kitsune's martial soul was a sword. She seemed to have been born for the sword Tao. For Kitsune, there was no such thing as being one with the sword, or being born with the sword blood. She existed as a peerless immortal sword that could cleave through the world. Her every move, was in perfect harmony with the sword Tao. However, the heavenly tribulation was simply too powerful. Back then, Yun Ting had almost died under the impact of the heavenly tribulation. If Su Zimo hadn't arrived and used the Qinglian bloodline to nourish Kitsune's body and bloodline for 3 years, she wouldn't have been able to hold on. She was knocked down time and time again, but she stood up again and again to face the heavenly tribulation. Finally, the heavenly tribulation ended. Bai Mingxue was lying on the ground. Her entire body was charred black, and the surface of her body was cracked like dry land. She no longer looked human. Many sword cultivators heaved a sigh of relief. It was over. Wang Dong and the others also heaved a sigh of relief. Although Kitsune seemed to be severely injured, her body was still exuding vitality. As long as she recuperated for a while, she would be able to recover. Wang Dong was concerned and wanted to help Kitsune up with the sword cultivators of the Sword Slayer Peak. However, the Immortal King powerhouses guarding the surroundings looked solemn and stopped any sword cultivators from moving forward. On the mountain peak, the 8 peak masters looked at the sky above Kitsune with solemn expressions. Their divine senses were powerful, and they could feel it more clearly. After the heavenly tribulation, although the tribulation clouds had dispersed, they were now gathering again and showing signs of coming back. The heavenly tribulation was not over. The heavenly tribulation. The 8 peak masters looked at each other and thought of this possibility at the same time. At this moment, the sword cultivators on the Sword Slayer continent also gradually noticed the abnormality. They looked up at the tribulation clouds that were gathering in the sky again and exclaimed, "Oh my God, is it the heavenly tribulation? It must be. I've already cultivated to the celestial realm, but I still feel palpitations when facing the aura emitted by the tribulation clouds. The heavenly tribulation is unprecedented. I didn't expect that I Qinzhong would be so lucky to see it in my life. Junior sister Baiming is already in a very bad state. She already had such a hard time passing the heavenly tribulation. How can she survive the heavenly tribulation?" Wang Dong was worried. Since ancient times, there had been some monsters who had been destroyed by the heavenly tribulation and failed to survive. The peak master of the ultimate sword peak moved and suddenly broke through the air. The other peak masters were a little confused and did not know why the peak master of the ultimate sword peak suddenly left. Not long after, the peak master of the ultimate sword peak appeared again. Beside her was a beautiful woman with a cold expression. She was the #1 sword immortal among the true disciples, Lin Xuanjin. "Master, what are you doing?" Lin Xuanjin asked indifferently. She was initially in seclusion, but the peak master of the ultimate sword peak barged in and brought her here forcefully. The peak master of the ultimate sword peak pointed ahead and said in a deep voice, "The heavenly tribulation is rare in the world. You shouldn't want to miss it." Suddenly Lin Xuanjin's mind stirred. Heavenly tribulation? She knew very well what the heavenly tribulation meant. Legend had it that the last tribulation of the heavenly tribulation would descend with a supreme divine power. Theoretically speaking, anyone who witnessed this supreme divine power would have a chance to cultivate it successfully. Up until now, she had only cultivated the immortal slaying sword to the quasi-supreme level, and had yet to achieve a true supreme divine power. She had comprehended it for many years, and felt that it was still lacking some charm. If she could witness the supreme divine power, the immortal slaying sword, she would definitely be able to comprehend its mysteries and succeed. Of course, the prerequisite was that the ultimate divine power of the heavenly tribulation was the immortal slaying sword. Chapter 2755. I wonder what kind of supreme divine power will descend. Supreme Sword Peak's Peak Master murmured softly. Ultimate Sword Peak's Peak Master replied. Supreme divine powers are extremely rare, and there have only been slightly more than 10 of them throughout history. Since Kitsune cultivates the Tao of the sword, there's a high chance that the immortal slaying sword will descend. Kitsune. Lin Xuanjin murmured softly. She was focused on cultivating the Tao of the sword, and rarely paid attention to the people and matters of the 8 sword peaks. As such, she was still unfamiliar with that name. As though he had discovered something, Lin Xuanjin frowned slightly and suddenly asked, Junior sister Baiming hasn't condensed a Tao fruit yet. Why is there a heavenly tribulation descending? Ultimate Sword Peak's Peak Master replied. It's said that Kitsune cultivates a dermic formulation known as the Wu Dao. It's different from the immortals, Buddhas and fiends. Wu Dao? Why haven't I heard of it before? Lin Xuanjin asked again. Ultimate Sword Peak's Peak Master replied. This Wu Dao was created by Kitsune's master in the lower realm. He's truly an anomaly, and created a Dao technique as such. To think that he could cultivate it to this level as well. As they conversed, the 9th heavenly tribulation had already descended. The first 3 heavenly tribulations of the 9th heavenly tribulation are similar to the previous 8 heavenly tribulations. However, the level of power is much higher. If you want to survive it, you'll have to release your bloodline phenomenon. Standing on the spot, Kitsune recalled what Su Zimo told her about the 9th heavenly tribulation and gripped her sword tightly with a resolute gaze. Fight! Kitsune flicked her sword and let out a hum. Her blood chi rumbled, and the sound of a tsunami could be heard. Immediately after, the roar of a dragon and elephant echoed from her bloodline and shook the world. That was Wu Dao's 9th transformation, the power of dragon and elephant. Divine dragons circled and divine elephants appeared, protecting Kitsune's side. When they collided with the first heavenly tribulation, a deafening bang was heard. There were thousands of people who cultivated the Wu Dao in Tianhuang mainland alone. But when it came to Wu Dao, no one could reach Kitsune's level of achievement. It was because when Kitsune first started practicing Wu Dao, it was Su Zimo who personally taught her and helped her lay down a perfect foundation. Wu Dao's 6th transformation was able to condense the qi and blood Jin Dan. However, Su Zimo allowed Kitsune to continue cultivating until she reached Wu Dao's 9th transformation. Only then did she begin to condense her martial spirit. Kitsune wouldn't have been able to survive the 99 heavenly tribulations if she hadn't laid a solid foundation back then. The 2nd heavenly tribulation descended. The divine dragon and divine elephant were just manifestations of Wu Dao, not her bloodline manifestations. They had already been destroyed by the first tribulation. Kitsune channeled her blood chi to its limits, and a dark and deep ocean appeared behind her, emitting a bone-chilling coldness. The Northern Sea. Kitsune released her bloodline phenomenon and withstood the 2nd heavenly tribulation head-on. The Northern Sea was smashed into pieces by the heavenly tribulation and was almost dried up. Kitsune spat out a mouthful of blood. Although the Northern Sea dissipated most of the power of the heavenly tribulation, a portion of it still surged into her body. Before she could catch her breath, the 3rd heavenly tribulation descended. Kitsune pursed her lips tightly and endured the pain as she continued channeling her bloodline. A gigantic shadow appeared in the initially dried-up Northern Sea. Suddenly, the shadow broke out of the sea and charged towards the 3rd heavenly tribulation. It was a massive creature that towered in midair and covered the skies. Opening its gigantic mouth, it let out an ancient and terrifying aura. Kuan race. Many sword cultivators recognized the background of the massive creature and exclaimed, "Boom!" The 3rd heavenly tribulation dissipated. Kitsune's bloodline phenomenon was completely shattered as well. Coughing out mouthfuls of blood, her aura was weak, and she could no longer hold on. The 4th heavenly tribulation is called the bloodline tribulation, and it's used directly on your bloodline. Kitsune recalled what Su Zimo said to her, and tried her best to compose herself to withstand the impact of the bloodline tribulation. Right in front of everyone, Kitsune's body trembled continuously and curled up, as though she was enduring immense pain. As time went by, Bai Mingshue's figure began to fade away and mysteriously disappeared. What remained in place was a dark and profound longsword. The sword emitted a strange power, and chose to devour the bloodline tribulation instead of resisting it. This is. On the peak, the 8 peak masters of the sword peaks were shocked, and their eyes were filled with disbelief. She comprehended a new sword Dao in the process of the tribulation? That should be the case. However, the sword Dao coexists with her bloodline and is not complete and stable yet. Before long, the bloodline tribulation ended. Kitsune's figure appeared once more. After the fourth bloodline tribulation, her injuries did not worsen. Instead, they healed more than half, and she was in a much better state. Nobody knew how to deal with the 99 heavenly tribulations better than Suzimo. That was because he had gone through it twice alone. As for the experiences of the two tribulations, he imparted all of them to Kitsune. The subsequent essence spirit tribulation, Dao heart tribulation and karma tribulation, did not pose much of a threat to her as Kitsune withstood them one by one. It was only when the eighth weapon tribulation descended that Kitsune suffered immense damage. Kitsune's body was drenched in blood, and her body swayed. She barely managed to stand in a pool of blood with the help of her destiny sword. There was only one last heavenly tribulation left. However, everyone knew that the last heavenly tribulation was the most terrifying and fatal. The world turned incomparably oppressive. On the mountain peak, all the sword cultivators in the air held their breaths as they stared unblinkingly at the tribulation cloud in the sky. The last heavenly tribulation was a supreme divine power. Being able to witness, it was also a great opportunity for them. Even the powerful auras in the Myriad Swords Palace became incomparably quiet, afraid of disturbing Kitsune. Only the Daluo sword steel was still emitting sword hums, as if it was supporting Kitsune. Lin Xuanjin and Yun Ting were also looking forward to the next scene. Suddenly, peach blossoms of various colors floated down from the tribulation cloud in the sky. White, red, pink, they exuded an elegant fragrance. The fragrance was not strong, but when the surrounding sword cultivators smelled it, they felt a little dazed and intoxicated. Even most perfected immortal sword cultivators were not spared. Only the 8 peak masters on the mountain peak had grave expressions. They could clearly see that although the peach blossoms looked ordinary, they were all condensed from sword chi. Each of them contained terrifying destructive power. It's not the immortal slaying sword. What kind of supreme divine power is this? It looks like a sword Dao divine power, but it doesn't seem to have appeared before. A new supreme divine power has descended. The 8 peak masters were greatly shaken at this thought. At this moment, the rain of petals continued to fall, faintly forming 8 words in the sky. Heavenly drunken flower, single sword of frost. Everyone subconsciously read out the words. Hum. The sword hummed. A dazzling sword light appeared in the sky of peach blossoms, carrying with it an extremely sharp sword intent. Like a bolt of lightning streaking across the night sky, it instantly sank into Kitsune's body. End of chapter 1. Chapter 2756. The moment the sword light arrived, Kitsune's body erupted with a towering sword intent. Her murderous aura wreaked havoc in the world. A crimson sword burst out of Kitsune's body and collided with the sword light. Immortal slaying sword, a shout came from the crowd. The 8 peak masters on the mountain peak were also shocked. Although the immortal slaying sword had not reached the level of a supreme theurgy, it had reached the level of a quasi-supreme theurgy. Boom! The 2 sword Daos collided. After a long time, the tribulation clouds dispersed. Between heaven and earth, not a sound could be heard. All the sword cultivators, including the immortal kings and the 8 peak masters on the sword slaughtering peak, were stunned in place. They were subdued by the sword intent revealed by the sword. There were no words that could describe the amazement of this sword. Perhaps only those words could describe it. The sky was intoxicated with flowers, and the sword was cold with frost. A new supreme theurgy had descended upon the sword realm, because of Kitsune. On the top of the mountain, Lin Xuanjin's calm eyes were also stirred, and his mind was shaken. Yun Ting clenched his fists with a complicated expression. Although Baiming Shui had attracted the 9x9 heavenly tribulation, this alone was not enough to affect him much. The heavenly tribulation was just a facade. A cultivator with an 8x9 heavenly tribulation might not lose to a 9x9 heavenly tribulation cultivator in the future. It was said that the most powerful immortal emperor in the world, the blood butterfly demon emperor of the Great Wasteland domain, had only attracted a 5x9 heavenly tribulation when she reached the true self realm. Generally speaking, a living being could attract a 6x9 heavenly tribulation, at the very least, after condensing a Tao fruit. However, the blood butterfly demon emperor was so weak that she did not even attract a 6x9 heavenly tribulation. Later on, she still stood at the peak of the upper realm and looked down on all living beings. The number of heavenly tribulations at the true self realm was one level lower than Kitsune's. This could not shake Yunting's Tao heart at all. However, when he saw the sword just now, he was deeply shocked. He could not describe the terror of this sword. He only knew that if he and Kitsune were in each other's shoes, he would not be able to block this sword. Everyone's eyes fell on Kitsune. Her condition looked extremely bad. After all, her immortal slaying sword was only at the quasi-supreme level, and the last of the 99 heavenly tribulations was a truly supreme divine ability. Kitsune's life force was weak, and even the essence spirit in her consciousness was severely injured and was on the verge of shattering. It's over. Sensing all this, many sword cultivators shook their heads and sighed. A trace of regret flashed through Yunting's eyes. At this moment, a green figure flashed and arrived beside Kitsune. It was Suzimo. Suzimo stepped forward with a solemn expression. He picked up the unconscious Kitsune and prepared to return to the cave residence. The next moment, the void beside him suddenly cracked open, and an extremely powerful aura descended. The peak master of the sword slaughtering peak had arrived. Put him down and leave him to me. The peak master of the sword slaughtering peak blocked Suzimo's path. Sword light flashed in his eyes, emitting a powerful aura as he charged towards Suzimo. No. Suzimo's expression was fearless as he spoke slowly. His tone was firm and unquestionable. Even in the face of an immortal king expert, Suzimo did not avoid his gaze at all. The surrounding sword cultivators opened their mouths slightly. At this moment, everyone seemed to have an illusion that Suzimo was not at a disadvantage in terms of aura when facing the peak master of the sword slaughtering peak. Who is that? On the peak? Lin Xuanjin's gaze landed on Suzimo as he suddenly asked. The ultimate sword peak's peak master said. He is Kitsune's master in the lower realm. Lin Xuanjin nodded slightly. Sigh. The five elements sword peak's peak master suddenly sighed. Brother Lu, you're too anxious. Kitsune is so severely injured that even her essence spirit is on the verge of shattering. Even the Emperor Lords of the Myriad Swords Palace can't do anything, let alone us. The illusory sword peak's peak master nodded as well. If they could save her, those old fellows would have appeared long ago. Amitba. The Zen sword peak's peak master said. We should persuade Brother Lu lest he injures Kitsune's master in a moment of rashness. After all, this matter has nothing to do with that person. What did you say? When the peak master of the sword slaughtering peak saw that Suzimo actually dared to oppose him, he could not help but feel enraged. The sword light in his eyes became even sharper, and was about to spurt out. Can you save her? Suzimo asked with a calm expression. Aye. The peak master of the sword slaughtering peak was stumped and stunned on the spot. Indeed, he could not save Kitsune. However, he truly did not want Kitsune to die just like that, even if he had to try all his methods. Since you can't save her, don't block the way. Right then Suzimo said, I'll save my disciple. Don't disturb me for a month. With that said, Suzimo carried Kitsune and headed towards his cave abode. When he heard that, the peak master of the sword slaughtering peak could not believe it. However, a glimmer of hope reignited in his heart, and he instinctively stepped aside. In the blink of an eye, Suzimo carried Kitsune and disappeared from everyone's sight. The peak master of the sword slaughtering peak stood on the spot with a conflicted expression. After pondering for a long time, he took a deep look in the direction that Suzimo and Suzimo left and turned to leave. On the peak, Lin Xuanjin had already left and returned to Ultimate Sword Peak to continue his seclusion. Although she did not see the descent of the immortal slaying sword this time round, the supreme mystic power of the sword Tao still shocked her immensely. She wanted to enter seclusion as soon as possible to absorb and refine the insights she had just gained. Brother Lu, let him try. The peak master of the five elements sword peak sighed. If you take Kitsune away, You'll probably only be able to watch her die in front of you in the end. The peak master of the ultimate sword peak said, "That's right. Even if he can't save her, Kitsune is still his disciple. He should be the one to send Kitsune on her final journey." The peak master of the sword slaughtering peak remained silent. He looked at Kitsune's cave abode with a hint of anticipation in his eyes. After returning to his cave abode, Suzimo immediately activated the surrounding immortal formations and shielded the entire cave abode. Along the way, he had already checked Kitsune's injuries from head to toe. Kitsune's injuries were indeed extremely severe, and her life was hanging by a thread. The most terrifying thing was that Kitsune's essence spirit, which was the sword soul in her spirit consciousness, suffered a tremendous impact and was almost shattered. However, Suzimo could clearly tell that the final strike of the 99 heavenly tribulation did not seem to be fatal, and even left a trace of life for Kitsune. This was completely different from the situation of his 2 heavenly tribulations back then. Back then, when he attracted the 99 heavenly tribulations twice, the final heavenly tribulation was meant to destroy him. However, at the final moment, when the sword beam entered Kitsune's body, it actually left a trace of life and saved Kitsune's life temporarily. As long as there was a trace of life, Suzimo would have a way to save Kitsune. Relying on the bloodline of the rank 12 creation Qinglian, he could cast Lotus Birth Finger continuously for a month and heal Kitsune's injuries. As for the sword soul injury, that was the most difficult to resolve. He still had some fretless fruits in his storage bag that he could feed to Kitsune. If one fruit was not enough, he could feed her 2. Coupled with the Buddhist Sutra of the Prajna Nirvana Sutra, he could nourish Kitsune's sword soul continuously. There was a 70% chance that Kitsune would recover to her original state. Only the rank 12 creation Qinglian could save Kitsune, who was on the brink of death, by relying on the incomparably strong vitality in her bloodline. A healed Kitsune would have the chance to comprehend 2 types of supreme sword Tao mystic arts. The world is intoxicated by flowers, and the 9 heavens are filled with frost. At the beginning there was a plot that was not uploaded. Just refresh it. End of chapter. Chapter 2757. After the 99 heavenly tribulations dissipated, many sword cultivators returned to their respective sword peaks. Most of the sword cultivators gained new insights into the Tao of the sword after this viewing. If anyone in the realm could attract the 99 heavenly tribulations, it would be a rare opportunity for all the cultivators in the entire realm. On the peak of Sword Culling Peak, the 8 peak masters gathered here and recalled the scene of Kitsune's tribulation earlier on, lamenting endlessly. If I'm not wrong, Kitsune should have the original scrolls of the 3 sword arts in her storage bag. The ultimate sword peak's peak master said in a deep voice. The others were not surprised when they heard that. The power of the 99 heavenly tribulations was way too ferocious. Not only was Kitsune's body severely injured, her storage bag was almost shattered as well. Through the shattered storage bag, the 8 peak masters sensed the aura of the 3 sword arts. Furthermore, it was the most primitive and purest sword chi of the 3 sword arts. The 5 elements sword peak's peak master nodded as well. Although her immortal slaying sword hasn't reached the level of a supreme mystic power, it's still quasi-supreme. That charm and sword intent are definitely there. The sword culling peak's peak master said, I've been paying attention to her cultivation situation. At least 3 years ago, she had yet to fuse the 3 sword arts, and was unable to condense the immortal slaying sword. The reason why she was able to cultivate the immortal slaying sword should be because she read the original scrolls of the 3 sword arts. The illusory sword peak's peak master lamented, Kitsune is truly blessed to be able to obtain the original scrolls of the 3 sword arts. The sword culling peak's peak master was confused. But she has been cultivating in sword culling peak for the past 3 years, and has never left at all. How could she have obtained the 3 sword arts? 3 years ago, the 8 peak masters exchanged glances and thought of the same person at the same time. 3 years ago was the time when Suju of the Heaven Realm arrived. Could he have imparted them to Kitsune? If that's the case, he should have cultivated the 3 sword arts as well. The fact that he could impart the original scrolls of the 3 sword arts to Kitsune shows how much he values Kitsune. Even personal disciples might not be able to see the initial copies of the 3 great sword techniques. Not to mention, Su Zimo had directly given the first copies of the 3 major sword techniques to Kitsune. No matter what, the first copies of the 3 great sword arts have been lost for many years. In this life, they have finally returned to the hands of the cultivators of the sword world. If that Su Zhu really did pass on the 3 sword techniques to Kitsune, Brother Lu, you should go meet him and thank him in person. The return of the 3 great sword arts to the sword realm is of great significance. In fact, the peak master of the sword slaughtering peak was well aware of the importance of this matter. However, he was an immortal king after all, while Su Zhu was only a true immortal. He still felt a bit conflicted about thanking Su Zhu in person, and couldn't put down his pride. Moreover, Kitsune's life and death were still unknown. Even if the 3 great sword arts returned, he wouldn't be in the mood. The peak master of the sword slaughtering peak said, "These are all guesses. If that person really did pass the 3 great sword arts to Kitsune, it's fine for me to thank him. If he can save Kitsune, I'll prepare a huge gift and give it to him with both hands, let alone thanking him." If a sword Dao genius who attracted the 99 heavenly tribulations and gave birth to a new supreme divine power could be revived, he would definitely be the future hope of the sword world. No gift could exchange for that. Time flew. In the blink of an eye, a month had passed. During this period, the sword cultivators of the 8 sword peaks were discussing the 99 heavenly tribulations. Wang Dong and the other sword cultivators of the sword slaughtering peak would wait in front of Kitsune's cave abode every day, hoping for some news from inside. However, the door of the cave abode was always shut, and it was quiet inside. Although the peak master of the sword slaughtering peak didn't show up, he would look in that direction from time to time. On this day, the door of the cave abode, which had been closed for a month, slowly opened. A slender and graceful figure gradually walked out from the depths of the cave abode. The sword cultivators guarding outside the cave abode immediately looked in the direction of the sound. When they saw the figure walking out of the cave abode, their eyes widened in shock. Kitsune had come out of closed-door cultivation. This news swept through the 8 sword peaks like a violent storm, causing a huge commotion. Everyone had seen Kitsune's injuries that day. Even immortal kings were helpless. No one had expected that Kitsune would be able to come back to life and recover from her injuries. Wang Dong and the others immediately came to congratulate her when they heard the news. Kitsune entering the true first realm meant that she had become a true disciple of the sword world, just like them. On the mountain peak, the peak master of the sword slaughtering peak, Lu Yun, looked at this scene with excitement and couldn't help but laugh loudly. Ha 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 ha. The heavens are really protecting our sword world. Lu Yun looked at the withered lotus flowers on the mountain peak and murmured softly, "Senior Immortal Slayer, do you see that? Our sword world has given birth to a genius of the 90/9 heavenly tribulation." Although Kitsune's tribulation had ended, the lotus flowers on the mountain peak hadn't recovered their vitality as he'd expected. But seeing Kitsune return unscathed still filled his heart with wild joy. At the same time, the other sword peak masters also received the news. It looks like Sword Slaughtering Peak is going to rise in this generation. Sword Slaughtering Peak has produced a Kitsune, and the 3 sword arts have returned to the sword world. Lu Yun will probably wake up laughing in his dreams. Not necessarily. In this generation, Extreme Sword Peak has Yin Ting, and Solitude Sword Peak has Lin Xuanjin. It's still unknown who will go further on the path of the sword. Among the true disciples of the 8 sword peaks, Kitsune, Yin Ting, and Lin Xuanjin have all cultivated ultis to the level of quasi-supreme combat arts. I wonder who will be the first to comprehend the true form of ultis. Although Kitsune had obtained the supreme combat art Frost, it didn't mean she'd fully comprehended it. Grasping a supreme combat art was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Kitsune still had to continue cultivating and comprehending it. She needed time to settle down and find an opportunity. It could only be said that she was the sword cultivator with the greatest chance of comprehending Frost. On the mountain peak, Lu Yun silently looked at Kitsune, who'd just walked out of her residence, and was receiving congratulations from many sword cultivators. After a while, he suddenly sent a message with his consciousness, telling Kitsune to come to Sword Slaughtering Peak. For one, he wanted to see if Kitsune could revive the lotus flowers on the mountain peak. For another, he wanted to know more about the 3 sword arts. It didn't take long for Kitsune to reach the top of Sword Slaughtering Peak. It was her first time here, and a trace of surprise flitted through her eyes when she looked at the vast expanse of withered lotus flowers around her. Disappointment flashed through Lu Yun's eyes. The lotus flowers around her didn't stir at all. Putting the matter aside for the moment, Lu Yun smiled. Kitsune, there's something I want to confirm. Did your master pass down the 3 sword arts to you? Wariness flitted across Kitsune's face at the mention of Su Zimo and the 3 sword arts. Lu Yun smiled. Don't be nervous. Since the 3 sword arts are with you, they belong to you. No one can take them away without your permission. As for your master, I won't harm him either. If he did pass the 3 sword arts to you, I'd have to prepare a gift and thank him in person. Chapter 2758. Kitsune knew that she wouldn't be able to hide this from the Peak Lord of Sword Slayer Peak. She also believed that he'd keep his promise and not harm Su Zimo. She nodded. It was my master who taught me the 3 sword arts. As expected, Lu Yun nodded, but didn't say anything. Since that was the case, he really should pay this Su Zhu a visit and thank her in person. However, he wasn't quite sure what gift to prepare. If the gift was too light, it wouldn't seem important enough and would be rude. However, Su Zhu wasn't a member of the sword world. She was only Kitsune's master in the lower realms. Too heavy a gift would be inappropriate. He couldn't think of a way to prepare a sincere and appropriate thank you gift for the time being. Of course, he had more important things to discuss with Su Zhu. Kitsune had attracted a 9x9 heavenly tribulation and sent down a new combat art of Sword Dao. During her tribulation, she'd resonated with the exalted sword steel and assisted her. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Kitsune was one of the sword world's most important true disciples. Although she'd only just stepped into the true first realm, her status in the sword world and importance in the hearts of its experts was no less than that of Lin Xuanjin and Yin Ting. Kitsune was now a unity true immortal. Her master, Su Zhu, had only just broken through to the celestial realm. Their cultivation levels were about the same. In fact, in Lu Yun's opinion, Kitsune would definitely be able to defeat her master if the restrictions were lifted, and they could spar regardless of cultivation level. A genius of the sword world who'd overcome a 9x9 heavenly tribulation and had the opportunity to cultivate 2 combat arts could easily fight those above her level. Thus, the situation between the two was a bit awkward. In Lu Yun's opinion, Su Zhu no longer had the right to continue teaching Kitsune. Kitsune's master had to be an immortal king at the very least. An immortal king's knowledge and understanding of the Tao was far beyond that of a true immortal. Even ordinary immortal kings were a little lacking. Only peak-stage immortal kings like him, the Lord of a Peak, had the qualifications to become Kitsune's master. Furthermore, Kitsune cultivated the way of the sword. Even if Su Zhu had cultivated the 3 major sword techniques, what about him? How could she be better than Kitsune? Since that was the case, what could this person teach Kitsune? Of course, it wasn't appropriate for him to say such things in front of Kitsune. He could vaguely feel it. Was Baiming Shui extremely respectful towards Su Zhu? Moreover, he was somewhat dependent on her. He wanted to take advantage of this opportunity, discuss this matter with Su Zhu. What if this person took the initiative to quit? This pair of Kitsune? It was also a better choice. Peak Master, if there's nothing else, I'll take my leave first. Kitsune noticed that Lu Yun was deep in thought. No one knew what he was thinking as he opened his mouth to speak. Yes, Lu Yun responded, then asked casually, where are you going? Extreme Sword Peak. Kitsune responded faintly. Lu Yun seemed to sense something as he caught a trace of sword intent from Kitsune. What are you going to do there? I have a duel with Yin Ting, Kitsune replied. I'm going to meet him now. Well, Lu Yun hesitated. Kitsune, You've just passed your 9x9 heavenly tribulation and recovered from your injuries. You haven't cultivated in the true first realm yet. I suggest that you spend some time in the true first realm and familiarize yourself with the battles between true immortals. Kitsune shook his head. I'm fighting Yin Ting to test my sword and familiarize myself with the battles between true immortals. Lu Yin was a little exasperated. You don't have to go straight to Yin Ting if you want to test your sword. You can find a weaker opponent to spar with first. In Lu Yun's opinion, although Kitsune had passed his 9x9 heavenly tribulation, it was hard to say who would win against Yin Ting. Yin Ting's talent in sword Dao was also rare in the world. Moreover, Yin Ting had obtained many sword Dao inheritances and had cultivated each of them to the great accomplishment stage. Moreover, Yin Ting had spent much more time in the true first realm than Kitsune. Kitsune had just entered the true first realm, and her greatest advantage was the opportunity to comprehend 2 combat arts in the future. She'd wasted this advantage by challenging Yin Ting now. More importantly, there was another concern in Lu Yun's heart. Kitsune was cultivating the Wu Dao, after all, and hadn't even manifested a Dao fruit yet. Although she'd entered the true first realm, what were Kitsune's chances of winning against Yin Ting? A true immortal with a Dao fruit, and an even purer one? Kitsune seemed to read Lu Yun's mind. I've entered the true first realm as the Wu Dao. If I'm going to fight, then I'm going to find the strongest cultivator in the same realm. I'm sure many of our fellow disciples from the 8 Sword Peaks would like to see Wu Dao's battle strength in the true first realm. That was indeed the case. After learning that Kitsune had emerged from closed-door cultivation, the greatest suspense in the hearts of many sword cultivators was what level Kitsune's battle strength would reach after entering the true first realm with the Wu Dao. After all, heavenly tribulations were only external. If Kitsune couldn't rank in the top 10 among her peers, so what if she attracted a 9x9 heavenly tribulation? It would only prove that the Wu Dao wasn't worth it. Seeing that Kitsune had made up her mind, Lu Yun didn't try to dissuade her any further. He gave Kitsune a brief rundown of some of the trump cards Yin Ting had revealed earlier. After listening to everything, Kitsune turned and headed for the transportation formation, heading straight for Extreme Sword Peak. Lu Yun looked at Kitsune's back in silence. As far as he knew, the Wu Dao was a cultivation method created by a cultivator from the lower realms. It was incomplete and couldn't compare to methods passed down through the ages like the immortals, Buddhas, and demons. If the Wu Dao really was strong, then why didn't Su Zhu, the creator of Wu Dao, continue to cultivate? Lu Yun had been secretly observing Su Zhu for a long time. Her cultivation obviously belonged to the immortals, Buddhas, and demons, and she had a Dao fruit in her consciousness. It'll be good if Kitsune loses. Lu Yun thought for a moment. That would give him even more reason to persuade Su Zhu to let go and allow Kitsune to become his disciple. Mobile app, read. News of Kitsune heading to Extreme Sword Peak to challenge Yin Ting spread like wildfire. The 8 Sword Peaks, which had been quiet for a month, were once again in an uproar. For many sword cultivators, a duel between 2 peerless geniuses of the sword world was much more interesting than a 9x9 heavenly tribulation. Let's go to Extreme Sword Peak. Kitsune and Yin Ting are going to fight. Kitsune is too strong. She wants to spar with junior brother Yin as soon as she's reached the true first realm. Kitsune may have attracted a 9x9 heavenly tribulation, but she doesn't have a Dao fruit. She doesn't have much of a chance against junior brother Yin. Many sword cultivators discussed as they used the transportation formation to head for Extreme Sword Peak. Junior sister Baiming is too impatient. When Wang Dong found out about this, he couldn't help but be deeply worried, and then he shook his head and sighed. If she cultivates for a few hundreds or thousands of years and comprehends the frost sword, then even if it only attains the level of a quasi-supreme divine ability, she would have a 70% chance of winning against junior brother Yin. But now both of them only control the quasi-supreme combat art Immortal Eradication. Junior sister Baiming has just reached the true first realm, so she has no advantage at all. The true immortals of the 8 Sword Peaks, including Wang Dong, Gong Sunyu, Xinyu Qinzhong, and the others, all moved after hearing this. Cultivators of extreme sword peak gathered. The duel between two peerless geniuses of the sword world was the center of attention. Chapter 2759. The battle between the two monstrous geniuses attracted countless sword cultivators to watch. In the sword realm, it was not easy to see such a top-level battle between monstrous geniuses. For example, Lin Xuanjin was completely unmatched in the same realm. And between Yin Ting and Lin Xuanjin, the difference in cultivation realm was quite large, and they could not spar. Because Kitsune suddenly attracted the 9x9 heavenly tribulation and stepped into the true first realm, it became an unparalleled battle between peers. This battle was not just a battle between Kitsune and Yin Ting. Countless sword cultivators also wanted to see what kind of combat strength the Wu Dao that Kitsune cultivated could unleash at the true first realm. The 8 great sword peaks were in an uproar, but Kitsune's cave abode was abnormally quiet. Su Zimo did not join in the fun. He understood Kitsune and Yin Ting too well. The outcome of this battle between the two did not have much suspense to him. In the past 3 years, most of his energy was placed on Kitsune. When Kitsune stepped into the true martial realm, he also put down a load on his mind and prepared to continue cultivating and comprehending Dao techniques. His cultivation base had risen very quickly, and he had already surpassed Yin Ting. But in reality, he was still far from reaching the upper limit of his combat strength. At present, Su Zimo had already cultivated the immortal vanquishing sword, dragon elephant of many Buddhas, 6 paths of reincarnation, fleeting youth, 4 heads 8 arms, and 6 fangs divine power to the quasi-supreme level. However, to cultivate the true supreme divine powers, he still needed to continue comprehending. Don't look at the difference of the word quasi-dash. The power of the divine powers was worlds apart. If Su Zimo could cultivate all these divine powers to the supreme divine powers, his combat strength would reach the peak. At that time, with the 6 fangs divine power, 4 heads 8 arms, and the support of the few supreme divine powers, he could not predict what kind of power could erupt. Since ancient times, no one could master so many supreme divine powers at the same time. More than half a day had already passed since Kitsune left. Finally, a sound came from the cave abode's door. Not long after, a figure slowly walked in. Su Zimo opened his eyes and looked over. Kitsune's clothes were a little messy and stained with blood. Her face was pale, and her breath was weak. Obviously, she had consumed a lot of energy in this battle and had fought very hard. However, Kitsune's expression remained calm. Her gaze was as sharp as a sword. "He won," Su Zimo said. "He won." Kitsune nodded. Both master and disciple answered each other without saying much. Su Zimo had already expected this. Naturally, he didn't think much of it, nor was he curious. This was Kitsune's temperament. Even if she won against Yin Ting, she would not show any excitement. Su Zimo closed his eyes and was about to continue cultivating when his heart skipped a beat, and he asked out of curiosity, "Is Yin Ting all right?" Kitsune paused. After a moment of silence, she said, "I won't die." Kitsune's cave abode returned to silence. Su Zimo comprehended Dao techniques, while Kitsune recuperated quietly. However, Supreme Sword Peak was in an uproar at that moment. It was bustling with noise and excitement. Kitsune had already returned to her cave abode. However, there were still many sword cultivators gathered at Supreme Sword Peak, and none of them left. The battle between the two monster incarnates lasted for more than 4 hours. Everyone witnessed the entire process, and the shock on their faces had yet to dissipate. The killing sword Dao displayed by Kitsune and Yin Ting was an eye-opener for everyone present. At the beginning of the battle, perhaps because she was not familiar with the battle between perfected immortals, Kitsune was at a disadvantage and was suppressed by Yin Ting the entire time. However, as time passed by, Kitsune gradually got rid of her disadvantage. At the end of the battle, Kitsune counterattacked and suppressed Yin Ting completely. In the end, Yin Ting was knocked unconscious by Kitsune. Sword Immortal Tai Lai and the other peak perfected immortals carried him away. Only then did the battle end. Yin Ting is too pitiful. His face was beaten into a pig's head. He can't even be recognized as a human. Junior sister Baiming is too ruthless. Why do I feel like she has a deep grudge against junior brother Yin? As expected of the monster incarnate, who attracted the 99 heavenly tribulations. She was suppressed by senior brother Yin as soon as she entered the true self realm. Is this Wu Dao? He's too powerful. Even junior brother Yun's powerful sword blood can't suppress junior sister Baiming's blood qi. The sword intent in junior sister Baiming's blood qi is obviously more terrifying. However, she doesn't seem to have fully mastered it. How does Wu Dao cultivate? I wonder if it's too late for me to change to Wu Dao. The result of this battle was beyond the expectations of most sword cultivators. It also caused a huge commotion in the 8 sword peaks. Wang Dong, Gong Sun Yu Qinzhong, and the other peak true immortals had complicated expressions. Wang Dong smiled wryly. I didn't expect junior sister Baiming to be so powerful even without a Dao fruit. I've been trying to persuade her not to cultivate Wu Dao. Now that I think about it, I'm really ashamed. Qinzhong grinned. Junior sister Baiming is too ruthless. She's already invincible among her peers when she just entered the true self realm. Gong Sun Yu also sighed. Yeah, if junior sister Baiming comprehends the frost sword in the future, junior brother Yin won't be able to defeat her. Don't talk about junior brother Yin, Shen Yu said. If junior sister Baiming's cultivation catches up to ours, we probably won't be her match. At the peak of the Supreme Sword Peak. What exactly is this Wu Dao? I'm curious. From what I've seen, Wu Dao should focus on the cultivation of the physical body and bloodline. Kitsune's body and bloodline are so strong that no one in the same realm can match her. With such a body and bloodline, coupled with her sword soul, sword Dao, and sword heart, Kitsune is a pure flawless immortal sword. Congratulations, Brother Lu. The Peak Lords cupped their hands. With Kitsune on Sword Slayer Peak, it has a good chance of becoming the leader of the 8 peaks. Lu Yin was grinning inside, but he forced himself to remain calm. He nodded slightly. She's just entered the true self realm after all. She's still a long way off. If Kitsune becomes a true immortal, Brother Lu will be able to take her in as your disciple, the Peak Lord said. Kitsune's talent in Sword Dao is unparalleled. You must teach her well. Lu Yin shook his head at the mention of this. Kitsune has no intention of taking a master yet. She seems to still want to cultivate with that Suju. How can that be? The Peak Lord of the Demonic Sword Peak frowned. That Suju's cultivation is on par with Kitsune's. Wouldn't we be wasting a peerless genius time if he were to teach Kitsune? That's not a good idea, Lu Yin said solemnly. No matter what, Baiming Xue has achieved what she has today because she cultivates the martial Dao created by someone else, Lu Yin said solemnly. Moreover, this person saved Kitsune's life when she was on the brink of death and gave her the first ancient scrolls of the 3 sword arts. From a certain perspective, the world of swords owes him a debt of gratitude. It would be rude of me to ask him to leave Kitsune. That you're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.